How have you seen a person's life be ruined in a single day? I was working in a bank. One day, the director fired one of his executives. The whole, "Empty your desk, you're fired," speech in front of everyone. The director was furious, and the guy seemed entirely destroyed. Then he explains to all that this guy gave his login and password to a friend in another branch. The friend used that login and others while doing some kind of credit card fraud. Police arrested her but lacked evidence against the fired guy, so they just fired him on the spot. Obviously, besides losing his job, he was also blacklisted to work in banks or finance. Story 2. Yup, and I did it. Boss had and produced child abuse content. It disturbed me so much, I spoke with a friend who was a desk sergeant the town over and asked what could be done. He passed word along to the chief of the town where it was happening. 2 days later, the biggest cop I've ever seen walked through the door of our shop and asked to see everyone's ID, cuffed and stuffed. You should have seen his face when I was summoned to testify at the grand jury hearing. Edit. This whole thing has been sort of cleansing for me. I've never spoken about it to anyone other than my wife, who, by the way, supported my decision to become a jobless college student with a family and mortgage. For those of you saying I'm a hero, I'm not. I'm just a person. The real heroes in this thread are ones that lived through situations like this and continued on. Maybe reach out to some of them and ask if they're okay. Let them know that they're important, respected, and most of all, a valued member of our community. I keep getting asked how I found out, and I've answered it on a few occasions and got a bit rude. Basically, I was approached by the victim and they asked for help. So, I helped. Story 3. My stepdad's life was ruined the day his son/my brother died. He couldn't cope with the loss, couldn't comprehend the rest of us were hurting just as bad, and turned even deeper into the alcohol and became even more emotionally abusive. Couple years later, when he forced my mom to choose him or me, I watched her make the hardest decision I've ever seen her make. She walked away from her husband, the love of her life. Edit. My mother and I no longer have much of a relationship. She made the right choice for the wrong reason. She has point blank told me she regrets having me. My stepdad is, as far as I know, still drunk off his butt and living alone. My mother is alone and living with regrets. As for me, I'm still healing from the scars, but mostly doing okay. Damn, OP, it sounds like your life was ruined here too. I'm sorry, brother, that's brutal. Everything seemed fine until the edit came in, my god. Story 4. I had a former colleague who was doing his residency in general surgery. He had just started his 5th and final year of training. One day in the middle of a surgical case, the police show up at the hospital for him. A tech pulled him out of the OR and he was arrested right there on the spot in front of everyone, still in most of his surgical attire. He had to do the walk of shame through the entire hospital, in handcuffs and OR scrubs. Turns out his ex-wife had gone to the police claiming that he assaulted their children. The children testified to this effect as well. All of us were blown away. This was the sweetest, most cheerful guy ever. Nobody thought him capable of something like this. Sure enough, it came out several months later the kid's statements were coerced, and that his ex-wife falsified the whole thing. It wasn't the first time she attempted to screw him over, but it was definitely the most successful. Dude's career and life were screwed. Story 5. I grew up best friends with my sister, and one day she didn't come home from work. I was 16 at the time and she was 22. I heard my parents start to rumble around the house, turning the lights on, and I could hear more commotion and panic. The cops had called our house because they found my sister's car damaged on a street in the middle of a neighborhood with the driver's side door still open, and they found one of her shoes was in the middle of the street. The next morning, still no sister. She worked as a bartender. She left work that night and some guy followed her, side-swiped her car, and when she got out to swap insurance, he kidnapped her, put her in his truck, and drove off. He continued to abuse her and held her captive through the night and into the next day. My sister managed to escape that next day and run to the nearest house, banging on the doors. The homeowners let my sister in and called 911. They could tell she had been beaten and attacked. She was taken to the hospital, which is when we got the phone call where she was. She had 2 broken ribs, her face was nearly black and blue, both black eyes, and scratches all over her body. After that, I never had my sister back. She survived the attack, but she suffers horrible anxiety and panic attacks. She can't go out in public alone. She drinks heavily and is terrified to move out of my mom's and live alone. I don't know. I just used to look up to her and we would laugh and watch movies and bounce on the trampoline, and she would drive me to try local food chains and we would listen to music, and ever since then, I've just never had my big sister back. I'll always love her, but it breaks my heart. In one day, her life changed for the worse. OP, my heart fully goes out to your sister. What an absolutely disgusting, vile, senseless act that no one ever should have to go through. Truly horrific. And I would never blame your sister at all for how she has changed because of it, because if there's a life-changing event, yeah, that would do it. Nothing but love and support from me, OP. Story 6. When I was in EMT school, we were told about a paramedic student. Instructor was a paramedic as well, who observed a stabbing call. They arrive at the bar and see a dude with a knife in his abdomen. Medic student takes a lead and pulls the knife out, something you never do, as I'm sure you know. Senior medic loses his freaking mind at this idiot, asking him what the hell he was thinking. Student freaks out and, you guessed it, puts it back in. The patient died as a result. Student lost any chance of having a good job, not even just an EMS, and was charged with the death of the patient. Might have been manslaughter, I don't remember. His entire life was ruined because he freaked out and made a mistake on a call. Not a rookie mistake or a common slip-up, but still, in about half a minute, he ruined his life. I'm sorry for laughing at someone dying, but what do you mean he put it back in? How does that ever happen? OP said you guessed it. No, I did not guess it. That wasn't even on my, top 5 list of things I thought were gonna happen. Absolutely insane. Story 7. One of the former anesthesiology residents in the program here was in his last, CA3, year. He was emergency call, which comes after C1, C2, and C3, and basically never calls in. But you have to be available in the event that you do get called in. Most people will sleep with their phone on or go out to the movies or do basically anything within a 30-minute drive of the hospital. Some crazy car accident happens that night around 2 a.m. and multiple trauma cases are going back into the OR. Our dude fell asleep, and his iPhone did some automatic update so he didn't get the call from the hospital immediately. His pager battery also died sometime that evening. He doesn't realize any of this until he's getting ready for work the next day at around 5:45 a.m., and he sees his phone has blown up. Shows up to work at 6 and fired on the spot. Guy was 2 months away from graduation and starting salary of $400,000 a year plus overtime. Story 8. Like 7-ish years ago, a bunch of the crew chiefs at my guard base were out celebrating one of their own who got his associate's degree. They were all drinking, not a ton, and eventually went home. Except for one guy. He stayed and drank until last call. He then decided to drive home. He hit a 20-year-old who was on his way to work at about 2 a.m. and turned him into a paraplegic. Our wing commander basically told him, plead guilty to the county and go to jail with an administrative discharge. His family would have been able to keep some of his benefits like the VA loan and GI Bill, or fight it, lose, cost your family tons of money, and get a dishonorable discharge. He pled guilty. Edit. Dishonorable is like you never served in regards to benefits. Also, any bonuses you received you have to pay back and medals are rescinded. It is also listed on job applications, and people will deny you because of it. I know dishonorable is like a felony, but to do it is a long process. Regardless of if he got convicted in civilian criminal court. His discharge ended up being, hey, you still have 2 years left in your contract before re-enlistment, so you're just going to re-sign that right now instead. Also, to the people who think that he got away scot-free, he didn't. He went to jail. Felony DUI and assault with a deadly weapon or something like that. The wing commander only allowed him to do at least one selfless thing, still being able to transfer his GI Bill and VA loan to his family. He also had to pay medical expenses for the kid he hit, and probably other damages as well, so it's not like he got a free pass. Story 9. When I was 7, my father came home from work and told my mother he wanted a divorce. He grabbed a suitcase and packed some things while my mother alternated between crying, trying to cook dinner for me and my brother, and screaming at him that he was insane. She had no idea where this was coming from, and she said she would change the locks if he left. He did leave, and she did indeed change the locks the very next day. She went from a homemaker to a single mother the next day, and our standard of living fell immensely. I don't think she ever recovered from the stress of the divorce and trying to raise us on her own. Thinking about what a kind, smart, and wonderful person my mother is and how my father basically ruined her life when she was only 32 really makes me sad. She just wanted to have kids and then go back to work when we were both in grade school so she could be a teacher like she wanted to. But the divorce ended that dream. We became latchkey kids in a bad neighborhood while she had to work in call centers or in hotel housekeeping because being a teacher didn't pay enough or give her enough time off to take care of us. I became a surrogate mother for my baby brother when my mother worked long hours. It was a culture shock to say the least. I remember going to therapy, which I now know was court-ordered because my mom wanted to have sole custody, so she had to have us evaluated to prove my dad wasn't up to task of sharing custody throughout the divorce proceedings, and counselors told me over and over that it was going to be okay, that my parents still loved us and we'd still go to the same school and have the same life we would have. I didn't believe them at the time, and I was right to. Our lives derailed entirely that single day. I'm okay, and so is my brother, but my mother gave all of her health and the best years of her life to raising us in thankless circumstances, while my father failed to pay child support and came around only enough to avoid a bench warrant or to prevent my mom from gaining sole custody and increasing his support obligations. It makes me bitter to see him happy now, and my mother is in poor health when she's 2 decades too young to have the health problems of an 80-year-old. Related, my grandmother became our second mother in the wake of the divorce. The stress of that took her as well. You can track pictures of her from about 55 when my parents got divorced and how young and beautiful she was. Then you look at pictures of her in her 60s and she looks haggard. She died of cancer in her early 70s. I blocked out the memories of those early days for a long time. I've only recently done the heavy lifting of trying to dig up the emotions and events of my life from age 7 to about 14 to further my goal of trying to support my mother. I honestly remember little to nothing. Traumatic memory is wild. This is partially because she deserves it, and partially because I don't want her to meet the same fate as my grandmother. It's weird to think about how I wouldn't be on the hook for my mom's failing health now. I could have had a happier childhood, and my mom could have had a better life had my dad just decided not to be a miserable, freaking jerk that day and all the days thereafter. Oh, and my grandmother might not be dead. I can't imagine the level of disrespect you have to have for someone, not even like lack of love, actual just disrespect, to end a marriage like that. Just come home one day, out of nowhere, no discussion, nothing. Oh, I'm done actually. I'm leaving. Bye. Good luck with the kids, honey. Gross behavior. Story 10. The first one that pops to mind is one of my coworkers arriving at work, sobbing hysterically. It took a while to calm her down to the point where we could understand anything she was saying. I thought she must have been robbed or something, but it turned out she found love letters in her car from her mother to her husband. All I could think was that A, if that were me, the last thing I would do is show up to work and tell everybody, and B, I would probably drive off a cliff or, I don't know, murder my husband. How do you ever recover from that? I mean, if my husband was just having an affair with a chick or another man, I would just divorce him, whatever. But my mother? I couldn't even. I still think about that. Poor girl. She was such a nice person and did not deserve that. Edit. They were having an affair. It wasn't just that the mom was infatuated and writing to him. Story 11. I was a surgical intern and there was a 4th-year med student just 1 year behind me on our general surgery team as an acting intern. Dude was an all-American in every sense. Extremely bright, tall, and good-looking, charming to talk to, class president, etc. He was literally like Captain America Steve Rogers incarnate. Wanted to be a general surgeon at my hospital, and all of my attending physicians were extremely fond of him. They already were talking about how great of a resident he would make, and what to do when he was an intern. It was nearing the end of his rotation, and he was scheduled to do a routine surgery with the chair of the department, specifically so the chair could evaluate him and give him a letter of recommendation afterwards. The evening before his big day, he and I went over the steps of the procedure and the little quirks that the chair liked, so he could impress the chair for a good letter. He left and we texted about some additional tiny details about the surgery later. Next morning, my chief tells me I need to scrub in for the surgery that the student was supposed to do because he didn't show up. I told a 3rd-year medical student who was also on our team to go look for him because it wasn't like him to be this late. This guy was militantly punctual. It was odd he would be late on a day like this. About an hour into the surgery, my chief resident comes in and asks me to scrub out. He informs me that the student I had sent earlier had found him in his apartment in a pool of his own blood, shot through the neck. None of his possessions were missing, and he had no clear enemies or reasons someone would want him dead. Someone just broke in and shot him. I had trouble believing it. It was bizarre and surreal. I was later questioned by a detective because I was technically the last person to communicate with him via text. A few months later, they eventually caught the kids responsible a few states away. Apparently it was some sort of gang initiation to murder a random person, and they got their due. But the whole ordeal left me in a funk for a while because it was so completely random and senseless. That kid had literally everything going for him. He was one of the really good ones. Story 12. I have an uncle who one day found his wife cheating on him with his best friend, only to be accused of assaulting his daughters. And since the mother forced the girls to choose, they had to go along with the mom and lied in court the next week. He lost his best friend, his job at a high role in the military, lost his house and car during the divorce, and got so much hate from his kids. He didn't have a fun month or so until his daughter broke under the pressure and admitted to lying. After that, the entire family, except the mom who won pretty much everything he owned, fell apart. Mom kicked her child out for, quote, betraying her. Kids left the house one after another, each to a different family member. Dad almost took his own life. Mom continued screwing other guys and made her own kids and her ex-husband's life into hell. Story 13. A really nice man who owned a gaming cafe here, age 33, has a wife and 2 kids. I know him. I used to frequent his place a lot, and one morning I was going to his place to just play and stuff. It wasn't open that morning, and his business partner was walking around asking where his partner was. I told him I hadn't seen him that day. Turns out his house was hit by a freaking missile. I live in Syria, so this is more common to me than most other people on this earth, but damn. His home was burned and he and his children lost their lives. Worst part? His wife, a college professor from what I was told, went to work that day before the missile hit. She was in the university when she lost her husband, her children, her home. Everything she had gone in just one lovely Mediterranean morning. I don't know much about her, I just hope she's alright these days. Story 14. On April 2nd this year, my best friend's son went to run a quick errand. Told her, be back soon. An hour later, she's wearing just her pajamas next to a hospital ER entrance, being told they can't allow her inside due to a shooting victim's admittance and the subsequent mandated lockdown. Her son, the boy I knew from the moment he was born 19 years prior, was brain dead on life support. He became an organ donor 5 days later. Didn't take even a minute, let alone a day, for her to lose her entire reason for breathing. She's ruined. And I'm dreading the moment she decides there's no point in going on, because barring a miracle, it's inevitable. Edit. Of course, I am 100% there for her. She's been in my life for over 20 years and we've seen each other through the best and worst of situations. But how am I supposed to prevent her from reaching her breaking point when she's lost literally the most important thing she's ever known? Nobody can understand the utter devastation of watching your own child die because of a senseless act of violence unless they've experienced it. He was not involved with gangs in any way. This wasn't a targeted attack. It wasn't retaliation. He was not in possession of a weapon. There was no confrontation. He was merely sitting in the front seat of the car, his longtime girlfriend driving. She too is a fragile, sweet soul who had her life destroyed in the blink of an eye. Story 15. A couple years ago, around Christmas, I was staying with my cousins. We were up late watching movies when we heard a loud crash outside. We run out to see a truck on its side. I call 911 and head toward the truck. The neighbors were also making their way outside. We go to help out the driver. We get him out and he reeks of alcohol. He starts asking if he can use my phone to call his wife. I let him use it and then go tell him to sit on the curb while the police get here. He's Hispanic and so am I, so we're talking in Spanish this whole time. He tells me to do him a solid and let him go, that his wife is on her way to pick him up. The cops arrive and I tell them everything that happened. He had tried to walk away, but the other neighbors stopped him. Cops grabbed him and took him away. 20 minutes later, his wife calls my phone back asking for her husband. I had to explain her husband was drunk driving, crashed their brand new truck, and was currently in the back of a police vehicle. I felt horrible telling her all this, and still think about that conversation every once in a while. This sucks as a situation, OP, but for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. It is, in my opinion, simply irresponsible to let someone like that go. There is absolutely nothing saying that they won't do that exact same thing again. In fact, those sorts of things are already due to underlying problems, and unless those are addressed, it'll happen again. Now, do I necessarily think jail will help solve those problems? No, but at the same time, that person is a danger to the people around him, even if he doesn't realize it. Story 16. Riding a crowded elevator. A casually dressed computer science type person is chatting with his bud on their way up, lunch in hand. He's complaining about some, quote, freaking outside analyst coming to screw up their afternoon with petty bullcrap. Just absolutely letting it all out on the short ride up to their floor. Ding! The two men exit, still griping and moaning about how much they hate the nosy outsiders meddling in their work. Suddenly, there's a quick shuffle behind us, as a very well-dressed, tall fellow in shoes worth more than my monthly take bounds in a long, proud stride off the elevator. As the doors close, we watch in horror as he raises his hand towards the two employees and says, "Excuse me, gentlemen, mind holding the door? You know, so I can screw up your afternoon." Slam. Lots of wind hissed through clenched teeth in that elevator. We never saw those guys again. Story 17. Watched a kid get an underage alcohol violation. Wouldn't normally be a life ruiner, but he and I were both college students at a university that had been on the news a lot for the drinking and party culture. The culture has been the same since the 70s, but they didn't like the bad press, so they cracked down. Like 2 months before this happened, they instituted a new policy. It used to be you would deal with the legal implications, then they would make you go to an alcohol education program, and you wouldn't be able to study abroad. Now they can suspend you for the rest of the semester, make you move out if you live on campus, and they cancel any financial aid the school is providing. I didn't know him well, but I do know that he, like me, had student loans on top of a generous financial aid package, and because of the aid program we were in, it's unlikely he could afford to come back without the financial aid package from the school. Drinking age stuff, it just always will confuse me as a Canadian, a British Columbian to be specific. Legal age to drink here is just 19, and I think it's actually in the law that you can drink under adult supervision, like, whenever. Don't quote me on that though. But still, hearing about someone losing their college career because of this, when if they lived one country up, nothing would have happened, it just doesn't make any sense. I'm assuming this is in the States, by the way, just because, university kid, unable to drink. Story 18. I needed a ride to school one day and rode with my best friend at the time, and we smoked some weed before. Let's call him Steve. He was going to bring the weed with him inside just in case they brought dogs to the parking lot that day. They do this. I told him not to, but he did. Fast forward to 5th period, and Steve was dared to snort a Mento for $10. Steve snorted the Mento and someone recorded it on Snap. Someone must have seen the Snap story thinking it was a pill or coke or something and showed it to the principal. He gets searched when he gets to the office and gets expelled for having weed at school, and then got arrested. We were a semester away from graduation. He turned to harder drugs like ice. Still hasn't gotten a GED and still a druggie. Haven't talked to him in over a year. It's sad. Story 19. I used to work the front desk of HR for a big hospital. There was a cute elderly gentleman who had been hired for the janitorial staff. I onboarded him and remembered how sweet, kind, and appreciative he was all the time. One day, a few months into his job, he came to the front desk and looked completely different. His light spirit was gone and had been replaced by something much, much darker. He had come in to set up counseling appointments and proceeded to tell me why. He was on the job when he received a call that a patient had fallen and he needed to go to X spot to help clean it up. That was it. Of course, he didn't realize until he arrived at the scene, the patient had jumped to her death from the top of a 5-story garage. He was the first person there, totally unprepared for the gruesome scene. No one had warned him of what he would find. No one thought that the poor janitor could have been spared from seeing that. My heart still goes out to him. I hope he got lots of counseling and was somehow able to move on with his life. He didn't have to say much for me to understand how deeply traumatized he was. Poor soul. Story 20. I caused it and was happy to do it. I was a captain in the army at the time. One of my soldiers, a senior E4 looking to make sergeant, had just gone through a rough divorce. His first and her second. Anyway, he had made Darth Vader's theme song / March song the ringtone on his phone for when she called. He was outside having a smoke and I was walking by his desk when she called. I smiled at the humor of it and looked down, instantly losing my smile because as his phone rang with the ringtone for his now ex, the screen showed a picture of her daughter, his stepdaughter, about 6 years old, asleep and unclothed. She wasn't sending the picture, it was what he had attached to come up when she called. I instantly sent 2 of my sergeants to sit with him and keep him at the smoking bench, but to say nothing while I had my company first sergeant call CID, Central Investigations Division. Long story short, a detective seized his phone, home computer, and office computer, found that since the divorce he had been living off post / base with a 16-year-old girlfriend and had been trafficking abuse content of his ex-stepdaughter that her mother knew nothing about. Between the evidence and my testimony, he was sentenced to 25 to 55 years in federal prison for peddling content, as well as statutory assault of his new girlfriend. You have to be a special kind of stupid to do something like that. Why would you okay, obviously, child abusers of any kind, not the smartest of the bunch, but this is just next level stupid, man. You have to know what you're doing is incredibly disgusting and wrong, right? There's no way you just missed that day in ethics class. I will never and hope to never understand the mind of someone like that. Story 21. Few years ago, a guy in our college class left his flash drive, and normally we never go on them. We just leave them alone so they can enjoy their privacy and let them pick it up when they come back. But this guy was a friend of ours, and our friends decided to play a prank and rename some of his files. We plugged it in and, yeah, child abuse content. Well, it turns out he didn't leave, just went across the road to get some lunch. But we knew what we had to do. We had already told our instructors and informed the police. A few minutes later, he walks in holding a bag of Taco Bell, looked over to one of our friends and said, "Oh boy, I bet someone's in trouble." The guy he said it to wasted no time. "Yeah, it's you. We saw what you had on your flash drive." He went pale. Instructor pointed at him, and the officer went over and pulled him out of class. End of story. Don't know what became of him after his arrest. Story 22. I used to work in the FTC help call center, so we took calls from people reporting they had been scammed. All day, 60 calls a day of people who had been scammed. I've heard it all. One of the worst was when a guy called and was telling me he had been sending his mortgage for his farm, which was like $2,000 a month, via Western Union to Nigeria, because he got a phone call from someone a year ago saying that he was with the mortgage company and to send the payment that way from now on. He was telling me that he was now going to lose the farm and his wife was leaving him for it. He was in bad shape. Crap like that really does happen. And other cases of other people calling to report that their parents have sent over $1 million to Nigeria via Western Union. That job was eye-opening in a bad way. Really boosted my cynicism. Story 23. When I was in grade school, I remember the police came to my school and started talking to my teacher. Turns out one of her boys was in an accident. The kid was brushing his teeth and slipped. He hit his head right on the sink. He was rushed in the hospital and they had him on life support, but he passed. A day before, I had a friend that had a fight with this boy, and she told him he should just die. I mean, we were in the 2nd grade. The boy slipped the next day and died the next. I, being an absolute moron, told her it's her fault. She cursed him. She took it really personally, and when I learned this, I apologized profusely. She stopped talking to me for a very long time, but we eventually became friends around high school. To this day, though, saying those words haunted me. I was such an idiot. Story 24. Was preparing to leave my house to fly a mission for the Air Force during a major storm last year. Trees down, power out all over the place. Got a call from my family that my brother-in-law still hadn't returned home from work. He took a shortcut only to find out the road was blocked by a downed tree. As he was making a 3-point turn in someone's driveway, a massive limb from a pine tree fell on his truck, ending his life instantly. I will never forget walking into my sister's house the next day, still without power, to help my family break the news to their 2 small children that their father was gone. The worst part was seeing all of his belongings just where he left them hours ago, knowing he was never coming back. Story 25. Years ago, a friend met some guys looking for a roomie on Craigslist. They seemed to get along, so he moved in. They were independent car mechanics, so parts were being sent to their apartment all the time. A few weeks after moving in with them, they asked if he would sign for a package which was expected to be delivered that day. The guys would be out and needed someone to receive it. Friend signed for the package. The person delivering the package was an undercover FBI agent. He signed for 5 pounds of pot. His roommates were secretly trafficking marijuana and he didn't know. Friend peed clean, had no drugs on his person in his car or room. Roommates testified that he was not part of the trafficking ring. However, because he signed for the package, he got 10 years behind bars. Okay, I'm sorry. So the roommates must have confessed they were in the trafficking ring, right? To testify that OP's friend wasn't in it. But then OP's friend still got 10 years behind bar? This seems like technical legal garbage. Justice system working as intended, folks. Story 26. One day I was in my driveway changing the oil on my then-girlfriend's car. All of a sudden I hear a loud screeching noise and a bang. I didn't think much of it until smoke came rolling through the neighborhood and a metal burning smell. She goes to leave for work about 30 minutes later, so I followed her out of the neighborhood to see what happened. First thing I saw was 2 mangled cars and a dead body on the ground. Found out that road rage caused a man to hit another car across the median into a head-on collision with another car. The other car was driven by the 17-year-old son of one of my neighbors. Couldn't imagine the pain my neighbors felt. Story 27. A woman filed a false police report and filed a restraining order on her ex-boyfriend to get back at him right when he was finishing up on being the new head coach of an athletics program, D1. Needless to say, the damage was done and he didn't get the job. Spent over $20,000 fighting it, all to get the charges and restraining order both tossed in appeals, but the damage was done. He has never been able to work as a coach again. Now he sells sports equipment at a store, because even though his record is technically clean, schools don't want to hire a potential media problem. I know all of the charges were fake, because in one of the examples she cited to get her initial TRO, he was with me that week, 3,000 miles away. Story 28. During my final high school exam for English, I remember I was sitting next to this popular kid because we were seated alphabetically, so I always sat next to him during exams. There's a well-known Canadian university in my city that everyone wanted to get into, and at the time the entrance average for business and science was 82%. If you managed to get 82% in your core subjects, you were admitted. They no longer do this sort of admission guarantee in recent years. It's been more and more competitive every year. Anyway, this guy I was sitting next to was telling me he was really ready for this exam, and he was going to write his essay on the one movie we watched in class. We were supposed to prepare multiple texts, just in case the essay question on the exam didn't lend itself well to one particular one. I don't quite remember the question, but I know it didn't lend itself quite well to the movie, but rather more so to a book we read in class. I finished my exam before him, and when we were allowed to talk, I asked him how it went. He looked dazed. He told me he knew he failed. He needed to do well on this exam to get into any university, let alone the well-known one. I'm graduating next week. Computer science, woo! And I met this guy again while looking for a new dress shirt for graduation. He worked at the suit shop. I asked him if he was graduating soon. He told me after high school he went to upgrade his high school courses so he could reapply to universities. He was saying that every year they increased the entrance averages and he couldn't meet them after upgrading, so he went to upgrade again. He repeated this process 4 times and finally got in for 2020. It's a dumb that how well you can do as a teenager can determine the next 5 years of your life. Story 29. My buddy OD'd amidst this fent crisis, along with another kid that graduated ahead of us. No one knew he was doing anything. I had done all kinds of drugs with the kid, but he was working on his MBA at Chicago. Insanely hard business school. He had his crap together when the rest of us were still trying to figure out our lives and not be doing drugs. Both sets of parents found their kids dead when they were home at the same time, and he had scored some H that was laced or just not H at all. He's not the life ruined I'm talking about, though. Both his parents were totally dead-eyed when we'd run into them around town for about 2 months, and they've both totally disappeared since. No one has any clue where they went. I hope they've found peace and just needed to change after something so tragic, but they've cut ties with even their closest friends and family in a small town, losing their only child to a freak OD. He was such a smart kid and so hardworking. Just got some crap cut with more than just baby laxative one night, and now that family is totally gone forever, I'm sure. Story 30. I guess I would say my own. I was a freshman in high school on my last day of testing, so I got out of school early, jumped in the car with my then boyfriend and a friend, and crammed in the backseat of my mom's SUV, and headed home after dropping off my friends. When we got home, there was a message on the answering machine from my dad's work saying they'd tried to reach my mom's cell phone, but there'd been an accident, and he'd been airlifted to the hospital, and we should get there as soon as we could. Long story short, a semi-truck without the proper reversing equipment, a spotter, flashing lights, beeping noises, anything, reversed into my dad's leg. As a last-ditch effort, doctors tried amputating it from above the knee, but by that point, the damage was done. He died, and we sued. My dad was the glue that held the family together, and losing him is something I still haven't fully recovered from over a decade later, but I'm working on it. Story 31. In high school, a student, 15M, a sweet kid, was called to the office 30 minutes before the end of class. He leaves a little curious, but happy as he was most of the time. He came back 10 minutes later looking horrible, getting his bag to leave. After, we were told that his mother had took her own life, and he was leaving with the police. We were told not to ask him about it and his younger sister because they were dealing with too much already. What messed him up more was when he found out she had left a box with letters to him and his sister. The fact she planned it and hid it for so long and thought they would be okay made it so much harder for him. Story 32. Stock market crash in 1987. I had been driving a delivery truck in San Francisco for a while. Saw this one guy most days in the financial district in one of the very expensive restaurants I delivered to, but never really noticed him. Day after, Black Monday. I noticed him sitting on a bench in his powder blue suit, looking like he was in shock. He sat there for days on end, same suit, desperation and fear quickly creeping into his face. One day, a shopping cart appeared, and over the weeks it filled with his new possessions. Old shoes, a dirty sleeping bag, food wrappers, and a soiled pillow. Through winter, same suit, same place, slowly going crazy. I tried to talk to him and get him some help, but he wouldn't even talk to me. He just turned his back and cried. At that point, the homeless population of San Francisco was undergoing a massive upsurge and services were overwhelmed. Best I could do at that time was leave him some food from time to time. He didn't even try to panhandle. I saw him every day for nearly a year until I left the city for another state. He was still wearing the same powder blue suit, but he certainly wasn't the same same man. Story 33. About a year and a half ago, I went to a seminar given by a guy named Adam Lothar. He was the director of a U.S. Air Force Institute for Nuclear Deterrence. He was a good speaker, and the topic was interesting, so it stuck in my mind. A month or so later, I was reading the local paper, and I saw that he'd been arrested for a child assault. The victim was a little kid. The paper carried his mugshot, and he looked completely defeated. I was shocked, but I assumed he was guilty. A few weeks later, I was surprised to see a tweet about it. Turns out the evidence of his guilt was incredibly thin, and it never even went to trial. Even so, as a result of being arrested, he lost his clearance and his job. He was prohibited from seeing his kids for months, and for a few weeks they were also taken from his wife and put into foster care. The police took all their electronics, and it took some kind of special court order to have them returned, even after the prosecutor had decided not to try him. He claims he spent $300,000 on his legal defense. When I first read that he probably hadn't done it after all, I was overwhelmed by how quickly his life and the lives of his family had been destroyed by a single accusation and overzealous law enforcement. I often think about what I'd do if my wife died suddenly and left me alone with our kids, or vice versa. But until I read this story, the consequences of being falsely accused of something had never occurred to me. Obligatory mention of how false accusations like this only make real ones go under the radar more. I don't care how much you dislike someone. If you have any human decency at all, you do not make a false accusation like this. Ever. Story 34. I'll report back tomorrow after I tell my boss that I applied for a job in a different department 3 months ago and was just offered it. She did say that if I left, she would probably quit, so hopefully it was a bluff. BRB. Edit. I was able to meet my manager and tell her in person before it flowed down from management. 1. I walked into her office and asked if she had time to talk and then closed the door behind me. 2. I told her I wanted to follow up on our discussions about my future. Then she stopped what she was doing and did a surprised Pikachu face. 3. I dropped the new job bomb and her eyes welled up. She was surprised but wasn't upset. Better than expected. She was super excited for me, and then we talked about salary negotiations for the new job. To be honest, I would take a lateral move with a no pay increase, but she urged I should ask for 15% and settle at 10. Then she left to go to lunch and jokingly said she wasn't coming back. Jokingly. Story 35. I used to work at UPS loading Amazon truck trailers bound for the warehouses. We got everything, and eventually you learned what boxes contained what. How did this kid start working on my crew? Young idiot kid who has a BMW at 19, probably from his parents. Kid knows nothing about anything. A few weeks into the job, I see this kid acting funny in the back of a trailer. I knew what the little guy was up to because afterwards, when I was shrink wrapping this kid, I saw a box of PS4 games torn open. I think it was Far Cry 4 or something. Before you can even clock into work at UPS, you had to go through security and they pat you down and everything. So we're walking after our shift and talking. The whole time I know this kid has a game or two in his jacket or on his person somewhere. It's winter, jackets were big. So we go through security, me first, and then him. I get through and go to my locker, and as I'm gathering my stuff, I hear beep, 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 beep. Dumb idiot got caught stealing from UPS, and they don't take that crap lightly. I saw him get carted off by security, and while I was waiting for my bus, I saw the cops roll in. Way to go, idiot. And by the way, I stole so much crap from there and never got caught. Story 36. Not just one person's life, but multiple people's. My uncle was diagnosed with ALS over 9 years ago, and the diagnosis rocked my entire family. He's still around, but can't move at all, except for his eyebrows and some slight kicking in the legs. His daughter, 12 years old, has only ever known her father as wheelchair-bound. This isn't even to mention the toll it's taken on my grandma, who has stage 4 COPD and can't even help take care of him. My mom moved states with my 2 brothers and sister to take care of him, and my dad ended up cheating on her, causing a divorce which, among other things, sent my 3 siblings into depression. I guess this doesn't really qualify as one day, but the diagnosis from the doctor, you have ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, started a huge downward spiral. That sort of thing is never easy on a family, and my heart goes out to you, OP. That is unbelievably brutal. Special shout out to your piece of crap dad who cheated on your mom through all this. Like, come on, man. Family wasn't going through enough, huh? Had to screw it up more? What a guy. Story 37. As an ex-paramedic who worked rescue for 11 years, I've seen many people's lives ruined in a day. Heck, in a second. I'll go over just a few. Mom buys son a brand new street bike for her son's graduation. Literally 3 hours after they picked it up, he wrapped it around a streetlight, losing his life instantly. When the mother showed up at the scene, she was inconsolable. Just kept screaming that she murdered him. And then same thing, but parents give their son a Mustang GT 5.0. This was 1990-ish. It was for their son's 17th birthday. Just a few days later, he ran into a bridge abutment doing upward of 100 miles per hour. Him and his best friend lost their lives instantly. I knew the family. The marriage fell apart after the death of the son, and the dad moved away. The mom wound up moving in with family. Knew a kid who took acid, and then decided it would be a funny joke to pretend to rob a convenience store. He took a toy gun and went into a local convenience store and, quote, robbed it. His plan was to go in, get the money, and then wait a few minutes, go back in, say it was a joke, and give it back. Yeah, we all see how stupid this is, but he was tripping. He goes in, gets the cash, and is standing outside when the cops come. No, he didn't get shot, but he did get 7 to 10 years, and was out in 5 for good behavior, but his life is crap. He eventually moved to another state to work for his uncle on a farm, and he freaking hated that farm. And, more close to home, had a friend who got very drunk. Him and his little brother got on a dirt bike and went cruising on the streets. He went the wrong way down a highway on-ramp and hit a car head-on and lost his life. His little brother was injured but lived. Story 38. A guy I used to work with had a case of severe mental breakdown and tried to take his own life at home by stabbing his abdomen multiple times with both cooking knives and a rusty machete. The physical trauma, damage to intestines, colon, etc., was so bad that he is still confined to his bed to this day. One day, not long after the incident, I went to the office a bit early and saw his wife in the HR room. She was sobbing and holding her 2 sons very, very close. Never seen someone turned so small so quickly. Later on, I found out that she, out of her being an unaware stay-at-home mom, had just learned she was not eligible for full benefit of what her husband used to earn. Her 2 sons had just started school and she had no work experience. With medical fees and household bills mounting, the news might be the last straw that sent her mental foundation crashing down. Our HR had to calm her for the better part of the day. Story 39. Just yesterday, a best friend of 12 years left my life. He didn't die, but he packed up his room, took his car, and left. He blocked me on all social media and blocked my number. He wouldn't tell me what I did that caused this reaction, but I find I no longer care. My troubles are minor compared to his mother that he abandoned. He left without paying his half of the rent, took his car, disabled his debit card, and cut off his phone service. All of which his mother depended on. She is jobless, broke, and without transportation. So here I am begging my boss for as much overtime as I can get so I don't lose my apartment, and so I don't end up homeless next to my former friend's mom. If I ever see him again, I'm gonna rattle his jaw and then ask questions when he wakes up. 12 freaking years, man. I can't even describe how much this hurts. His mom is in the other room right now. She hasn't eaten since yesterday. Why did he do this? Well, my 2 cents on it is he took the coward's way out. He found something in that life overwhelming, or he was displeased or dissatisfied with something, and instead of trying to work it out with the people that were involved, he just left. A completely unempathetic way of dealing with anything. Screw him, OP. You and his mother definitely deserve better. Story 40. It started in one day, but the effects and stuff unrolled over about 2 weeks to complete ruin. This dude's girlfriend broke up with him, and he must have just broke inside somewhere. He started bothering her. We lived in dorms at the time, standing outside her door, and when she wouldn't answer, he would come to any of the rest of our rooms and just run around in circles conversationally, venting the same feelings and stuff. They went from, I feel hurt she broke up with me for another guy, to, I can't believe she'd emotionally cheat on me, and she's terrible. Not counting, the guy was sort of a jerk himself. He would then not even come to her door and try to talk to her. He just went to our rooms and did this at all hours. It got to the point where he would try to talk to her again to get closure, but his behavior after the breakup made it easy and reasonable for her to very clearly say, stay away from me. He apparently is now suspended by our school, and he has taken that as a cue to say he is transferring. And I found out about the suspension part from a mutual friend, and apparently it's academic in reason. He just stopped studying and stuff and obsessed over his girlfriend all the time, who was admittedly needy and time-consuming. But just one day after getting broken up with, all of that crap was set off. Like it was so quick to see someone who seemed to have their crap together as a person just lose everything, all at a young age. Story 41. I remember once we got sent to a pediatric CPR in progress. We got it dropped on us before we had actually cleared our last call. I was white-knuckling. I remember this was my first time coding. We got there, ALS and the police were working a 2-year-old. I jumped in, but after the medics decided to transport, they kicked me out of their bus. I remember one of them, a portly redhead with caterpillar mustache, yelling, "Take the mother!" She was younger than me. She screamed in anguish and threw her phone to the ground where it shattered. I had no words. She got in our ambulance and we rode in the heaviest silence I have ever felt. We got to the hospital and I got permission from med control to bring her in. One of my friends, a heavyset ER doc named Hunt, was running the CPR. The kid's belly was distended, and they were pushing their third round of epi, which isn't a good sign. She just sort of stood there disbelievingly. Then she turned to me and raised her arms above her head, and I thought she was going to hit me, but she let out a cry and pulled me into a hug. I held her there in the trauma bay for maybe like a minute. Someone brought her a chair. Her husband eventually came in from work. They pushed 5 epis for that kid, but he never came back. Eventually, they just dropped another call on us, and it was back to the grind. I think about that kid a lot. Story 42. When I was 19, I was living with my dad, and he had a brain aneurysm rupture. He survived, but is now severely brain damaged and needs 24/7 care for the rest of his life. I was his sole caregiver for 2 years. Hardest times of my life. July 17th, 2005, the day my life changed forever. And another one. I overheard a coworker A talking to another coworker B about how she hit a kid on a bicycle and didn't stop. She said she freaked out but was sure the kid was okay, and I guess she wanted validation from B that it wasn't a big deal what she did. I couldn't clearly hear what B told her, but I did hear A say where it was, so I googled it. There were numerous articles online about a kid who was involved in a hit and run and was in the hospital on life support. His parents were obviously looking for any leads. I found a phone number where you could make an anonymous phone call, so I called and reported her. The police came to our office the next day and she walked out with them. I actually don't know what happened from there. I probably looked it up at the time, but I can't remember now, and we never saw her again. OP, I hope you don't feel an ounce of guilt for this. Hit and runs are some of the most cowardly stuff you can do. I understand in the moment you're freaking out, you're really scared, you're like, this ruined my life. Maybe. You did ruin someone else's potentially after all. And I know it's a really hard thing to ask of someone, but you have to own up to it. Story 43. The day I filed an Office of Inspector General fraud, waste, and abuse claim against the secretary of a federal government agency. Blam. Immediate retaliation beyond belief. Loss of government job. Blacklisted in every industry I held jobs in. Barely holding on doing Uber and Lyft. OIG doesn't want to deal with it because, quote, it's too high profile and the amount is too much. Almost $100 million. And OSC has been dragging their butts on the retaliation claim for 3 years. Wife doesn't understand why I would ever have done such a thing, and kids can't figure out why dad is nothing but an Uber driver now. Every time I get to the interview stage, the interview is canceled and I'm told something along the lines of, additional information has come to light. Thank you, but we are withdrawing your invitation. Gotta love how 8 years of college was totally wasted. Can't afford a lawyer to fight it. Whistleblower protection, huh? Depends on who you're blowing the whistle on. Too high up? Well, might as well paint the target yourself. Story 44. From a police friend of mine in another state. Pulled up on this to support another officer. Apparently a guy was pulled over after swerving and making a lane change without indicating. I think they figured he was just on his phone or something. Routine traffic stop. Probably would have just been a warning. Pull up and notice 2 kids in the back seat. The officer immediately smells liquor, pulls him out, does all the tests, and the guy seems okay at first. But guy blows something really high. He later admitted to having an open container in the back, saying he was drinking in the parking lot he had just left while waiting for his kids to get out of their daycare. Later found out he discovered his wife had been cheating on him and drained a bank account on the way to get said kids. His house was like 2 miles from the childcare place, so he had just recently been drinking. Since he had kids in the car, he was charged with multiple counts of felony child endangerment or something, and each charge applied to each child in the car. The extreme DUI. But he also had a loaded firearm in the car. I don't remember if the firearm made the DUI a more severe one, but I do remember my police officer friend telling me there was a specific charge for having the firearm within reach while having an open container. My friend pulls up to help and this guy is going ballistic. Plus, at this point, the booze he had just been chugging is probably hitting him full strength. So he gets irate and tries to headbutt and then bite the officer that has him detained. My friend takes him down, which apparently aggravated an old back injury this guy had, and more on that later. So on top of the other stuff he was getting charged with, he's now got another felony for assaulting a law enforcement officer. Guy had 0 history before this, not even so much as a traffic ticket. My friend ended up checking back on the guy from time to time, as after they got him under control and secured while EMS came, he started bawling in tears, spilling the info about his wife, and that's why he's drinking. He said most of the charges ended up sticking. He got multiple years in prison. Biggest ones were the child endangerment ones. Now obviously this is later on, but my police officer friend found out through the grapevine he had lost all custody of his children and had to have multiple surgeries and medical procedures while in prison for his back. Fast forward years later, I want to say like 3 or 4, my friend arrests this same guy for riding a bike without lights. He also had a bunch of H on him. As he was running him through, he recognized the name and put 2 and 2 together when he saw the guy's priors. While he was driving him to jail, the guy said he got hooked on pain medication because of his back injury upon being released, but the doctors would no longer prescribe him pills, so he went to H. Friend kind of felt bad that he might have caused it all, but told me the guy was pretty down to earth about it and said it wasn't his fault, and that he deserved everything he got. Pretty sure he's in prison, as I'm sure the drug charge violated some sort of probation. This is probably the one that matches the title the best so far. This man's life truly was absolutely ruined in a day. I'm not going to try to make excuses for him. He screwed up. It's true. I don't think he deserved everything he got, though. And by that, I'm mostly talking about the chemical dependency. Like, that's just... that's not his fault, right? I'm no expert on addiction, but it seems hard when you're in intense pain and need that kind of medication a lot. Along with everything else going on in his life, it kind of just makes sense. I hope he cleans up and fixes things, but man, it's a tough road for him. Story 45. I was in a quasi-home economics blow-off class in high school, the Monday morning right after spring break. The teacher made a somber announcement that one of our peers had lost their lives in a jet ski accident. When the teacher gave me the name, the girl sitting next to me screamed bloody murder and was sobbing uncontrollably for a good 30 minutes until she left class. Turns out it was her BFF since preschool, and the details we found out after she exited the classroom were horrid. The girl's friend was with her family at a nearby lake, taking turns on the family jet ski. They were hopping over the wakes left by bigger boats. Apparently, she had lost control during such a jump and ended up decapitated by the bigger boat's rotor. When she returned the next day, I made it my mission to secretly leave her a Dr. Pepper, her drink of choice, on her desk with her name on it each morning of that class until the end of the school year. I told anyone who spotted me doing so to keep quiet about it, and some kids thought I was trying to be a player, so I gave them a death stare. It was the only thing I knew to do. Story 46. This is minor compared to some stories in this thread, but at the time it was terribly traumatic. When I was 14, I got back from a church trip just as service was letting out on Sunday. My parents weren't there for service or to pick me up, and people kept coming up to me asking how my sister was. In the South, chit-chat is common. I didn't immediately realize something had happened. Someone finally realized I didn't know anything, and the youth pastor called my parents. My sister, a state trooper, had been directing traffic on the freeway the night before. A truck had hit her while traveling 55 miles an hour. She was in hospital and my parents were there with her. No one knew what the prognosis was. The youth pastor dropped me off at home, and I wasn't even in the door before my younger brother and sister were rushing to tell me my sister was getting a divorce. At the time, given our religious upbringing, that almost seemed worse than being injured. I'd reached incomprehension by that point. My parents didn't get back to the house until the next day, and I spent it in hell not knowing how badly my sister was hurt. Her life was basically ruined in an instant. Recovery took a long time, such that she lost her job. Her husband, during her recovery, was revealed to be both a jerk and addicted to gambling. He'd gambled away $50,000 they did not have. They divorced before she was able to walk unassisted. Having said that, she's doing much better now. Her health recovered almost completely, save for some memory problems due to the concussion. She went back to school and built a new career for herself. Story 47. Police here. The first fatality accident I was on. Very wealthy guy leaves one bar very drunk and drives to another. Bartender at that bar realizes how drunk the dude is and switches his drink with water. Drunk is too drunk to notice. Guy starts to leave and 911 is called because he's still leaving while being confronted by employees trying to stop him from driving. I'm responding to that call when a serious accident call drops and I go to the crash first. Approximately 2 minutes between the bar 911 call and the crash. They're less than a mile apart. Extremely rich, sober guys making a left turn into his neighborhood on a 2-lane road. Drunk guys going the same direction except on the wrong side. T-bones the sober guy. Sober guy's entrapped but seems fine. We didn't know that his leg was pinched, and the pinch was the only thing keeping his now severed femoral artery closed. Fire department cuts him out, and a minute or two later he stops making sense and isn't acting right. He passes out before they get him in the ambulance, and probably didn't make it to the hospital alive. Drunk guy tries to fight the other officers and blames them for the crash. He went to prison and hopefully lost everything he owned from a wrongful death civic lawsuit. He went from rich to broke and in prison in less than 2 minutes. Story 48. Well, myself, waking up with a numb butt cheek. Thinking it was just a trapped nerve, I attempted to remedy it with just a cold pack and then tried a hot water bottle. After that, even cold and hot baths. Nothing worked at all before midday. Fast forward 6 hours and it's spread to the other butt cheek. Ambulance service tells me it's fine, just see the doctor in the morning. It's about 6 p.m. by then. It spreads further, and the whole of my lower body below my waist is numb and I had problems urinating, etc. Ambulance takes me to the first hospital. After 14-hour wait, I get an MRI which shows severely ruptured L5/S1 disc prolapse in lower spine. Emergency surgery later, and I'm told I most likely won't walk again. Function of bladder and bowel and my parts down there may or may not ever return. It's just a waiting game. I now live with about 15 or so pills every day plus other machines to keep me functioning. Was a fun day. Story 49. My mom got an anonymous letter in the mail telling her my dad was cheating on her, his mistress was pregnant, and he was doing lots of coke. He traveled for work, so it was easy for him to be gone all week, party and do drugs with his coworkers, then come home and be super dad and husband on the weekends. My mom had no idea, and my parents had been together for 11 years at this point. My brother and I were 6 and 2. My mom confronted my dad and said she wanted a divorce, but my dad threw himself on the ground sobbing and begged her not to. They ended up staying together, which was a huge mistake. The mistress didn't like that my dad stayed with my mom, and she started calling the house threatening to end all of us. I think she ended up aborting the baby, but I'm not sure to be honest. My parents ended up divorcing a while later after a few more miserable years together. Now, they hate each other. Story 50. The day I found out my mom had a stroke, it felt like the carpet was pulled out from under me. I had been with her and she started acting funny. She couldn't remember certain words and was having trouble speaking. I figured her blood sugar was low as she's diabetic, so I took her home only to find her sugar was fine. She was starting to slowly recover but had this weird look in her eyes like she didn't know what was going on. My world was spinning as I slowly started to realize she may be having a stroke. It felt even worse because I'm a nurse and I didn't know what to do. I pleaded with her to go to the ER and she agreed. I remember her face clear as day, so scared and unsure of what was happening. I remember my dad crying as he drove us to the hospital. They thought it was a TIA from high blood pressure, but an MRI showed the tiniest stroke. The internal medicine doctor didn't even notice it. The neurologist saw it, though. He called me that morning and broke the news over the phone. I cried out of anger as well as sadness. I blamed myself for so long. I should have known it was a stroke. I'm a nurse. I felt like an idiot, like I jeopardized my mom's life. My emotions started to spiral out of control and it affected my work life. I had to go to therapy and eventually be put on Lexapro. I'm much better now, but that day will forever be my least favorite at this point in my life. I'll never forget how she stopped being able to talk and the fear in her eyes. Story 51. Everything didn't happen in a single day, but my life fell apart on July 11th, 2015, when my 19-year-old daughter and only child lost her life in a car accident. Life had already been rough when I was diagnosed with 2 types of cancer in 2010. Then my job of almost 10 years closed and I was laid off in 2011. And then my relationship of 9 years ended in 2014. The week after she died, I started medicating myself more and more with opiates until this last January when I overdosed on H and Fent and nearly died, being brought back with a nasal Narcan after 3 failed attempts with a liquid and injected Narcan. I survived only because a friend performed CPR on me, keeping oxygen going to my brain, while others scrambled around looking for nasal somewhere in my house. It was in the fridge. Unrelated to my overdose, I only just checked out of a mental rehabilitation center for severe stress and wanting to take my own life at noon today. I'd been under medical supervision since the last week Wednesday and made enough progress to be checked out this afternoon. Until now, I'd spent the last week in an empty room with no TV or radio, no shoes with shoelaces, no belts, drawstrings, no writing utensils beyond a tiny 2-inch golf pencil, and 3 frequently boring and nearly salt-deficient meals a day served directly to my room with no utensils outside of a scoop made from the edges of a paper cup. Honestly, my life ended the day, or the moment, my daughter died on a slightly curving highway in Iowa. Love your children while you can. Love your family and friends. Everyone who means anything to you right now. It can all be taken away in a single second. Story 52. Can I do a span of a couple years? Last day of 2nd grade, I get up excited for school because we were all supposed to go see a movie as a class. I walk outside and see my older brother, hang himself from the swing set. I just stood there and stared. My uncle comes out and sees it and yells for everyone adult and shoved me back inside. My grandma locks and barricades me in the bathroom while everyone else was frantically trying to save my brother who had used barbed wire as a noose. A long time later, I'm let out and my mom is hysterical. I have no idea what's happening. Didn't really sink in until I went to his funeral. Fast forward about 10 to 11 months and my grandpa dies from liver disease among other problems. Fast forward 6 to 7 months, I'm sleeping when my dad gets a call from his brother in the middle of the night. My brother had been out drinking with his friends and he drove home drunk in his Jeep. He lost control and was partially ejected. His legs were caught on the roll cage as it rolled multiple times. A passerby sometime later called the 911 when they got to a phone, pre-cell phone era. My uncle is dispatched as he was the helicopter pilot for the sheriff's department and was logically the fastest officer to send. Upon arriving and turning his searchlight on, he recognized my brother's baby blue Jeep all mangled. He landed and ran to help my brother, but he was already clearly dead. After medics and other deputies arrived, he flew back to base and called my dad, who then told my mom and then woke me and my sister up and told us what happened. I spent years in therapy and was a very quiet kid who stayed to myself. Eventually, when my school therapist got me talking, he got me to tell my story to my classmates and the teachers were officially informed of why I was the way I was. That was 20 plus years ago. Nowadays, I'm not really bothered by death, and it's one of the reasons why I got into LE and recently EMT. I want to try and stop what happened to me. I don't want it to happen to anyone else, or at least help them through the difficulty of it. My ultimate endgame would be to work on the DWI task enforcement team here. Story 53. Accounts payable clerk returned from maternity leave, but had to get a new place because she and baby daddy got evicted and they were broke. So she arranged for a coworker to leave her computer unsecured. Then talked another coworker into going to lunch early and flirted with him so he forgot to log off. She scammed a corporate check to a fake company with a fake invoice for about $10,000. Baby daddy took the corporate check to a check cashing place, but she had misspelled the town where they lived and they called us. I was in the area when he called her. She went pale, grabbed her purse, and ran out. Cops picked up baby daddy at the check cashing place. Cops picked her up at her apartment. Her mom was watching the baby, so the baby was okay. She was fired. Coworker number 1 was fired. Coworker number 2 was allowed to retire. She ended a $40,000 a year job, future career, and ended up with a felony fraud record. Fortunately, nobody asked me about it because I had advised coworker number 1 to stay the hell away from her because something was going on. I could feel it. I probably should have talked to her supervisor and stopped the whole thing sooner. I still feel kind of bad about that. Story 54. Buddy of mine had the worst day I've ever heard of. He wakes up to a fire. Turns out his girlfriend made food and forgot to turn the burners off. Fire department shows up after the 911 call. USA. Save the apartment in time, but my buddy is mad. Calls his girlfriend and they have a massive argument over the phone, ending up with them breaking up. Plus, she admitted she's been cheating on him for the past 3 months. He's absolutely livid, but he has a huge job interview at a big New York marketing agency that morning, so I calm him down after hearing what happened and drive him to the interview. I find out later the interview actually went very well, and they were very impressed with my buddy's skills in the industry. Apparently, one of the guys on the panel of the interview said something along the lines of, "You look like you just got dumped and your dog died when you walked in here. I'm pleasantly surprised." And my friend just lost it. Punched the guy in the face, got escorted out by security, and had a police report filed against him. Last I heard, he was working at the local McDonald's. Story 55. I worked on a failed TV show once. It was a late-night variety show. The guy who was the host was one of my oldest friends, and we thought we'd have done it. It was a dream come true. We'd filmed some episodes and gone on a quick break around Christmas. I'm based in another city, so I went back for the holidays. We were all set to get back into it. I had come straight from the airport with my luggage. I pack light, and literally had my hand on the door to the studio when I got a call from the producer. The host had been accused of SA. We went over to the producer's house and talked it through with some of the cast, then went into the EP's office to discuss what was going to happen. The host was in his office waiting for our verdict. When it became clear that no one wanted to continue, I went into his office, sat him down, and told him it was over. The last words I said to him were, "We were so close. We vomited in the bin and cleared out his stuff. We all signed a non-disclosure. Then I went and sat in a park for what felt like forever. Then got a plane ticket the hell out of there. The show never saw the light of day, and I haven't spoken to him since. But I remember thinking that I've never seen someone's life crumble right before my very eyes before that day. The silence before I told him, the realization that everything he had worked for was over. I remember I couldn't look at him in the eyes, and the shame and anger I'd felt. The dude was banished back to our small, crappy hometown and lives with his parents. He doesn't do comedy, he doesn't work, just lives at his parents' place getting fatter and fatter. I'm going to assume from the overall vibe of this post that the guy did it, like it wasn't just a baseless accusation, and that sucks. To be clear, it sucks for everyone around that guy, because you all had a good thing going. None of you were involved in that, and then that moron just ruined it for everyone, including himself, but just by doing some reprehensible garbage. Screw him, OP. You deserve better friends. Story 56. I was in my third year of college. I was really determined back then because my mom had died and I knew my stepfather didn't have the ability to take care of my brother who had non-functioning Down syndrome. I had spent my entire life preparing to be his sole caregiver per my mother's wishes. I got a phone call from a cousin I'd barely spoken to that my baby brother was dead at 16. I remember being calm at first, and then I'll never forget letting out this piercing scream and dropping to my knees. My roommate was terrified, but I told him very calmly what happened and then went to the hospital. My stepdad, much to my disagreement, made me look at my brother's lifeless body. He had had ADHD and schizophrenia as well, and I had never seen him so still. He had blood flowing from his nose and he was bug-eyed. Both this sweet boy who was the only person left in the world who loved me and my motivation was gone. I bawled my eyes out with my stepdad and I have barely spoken to him since. I didn't bother asking, but I'm fairly sure it was a heart attack. My dad would feed him all kinds of things because he begged for them. Gallons of ice cream a day, fried chicken all day, every day, Cheetos, tons of cases of soda. When my mother and I were there, we could sort of manage his food intake and had a lot more control. But once I went to college, there was no stopping my stepdad. He was around 300 pounds and only 4'8" the last time I saw him. I haven't been the same, and I still haven't been able to figure out what I'm here for if not him. I've had constant bouts of depression along with homelessness and money problems, and I still haven't graduated from college, although I am still attending. Story 57. I worked at a coffee shop and there was a burger place next door. I talked with one of the guys there and he went to my college on full scholarship and was on a student visa from Mexico, or maybe another Latin American country, I'm not sure. He really wanted a car though, and he couldn't start working until a year in because of the student visa rules, but he worked and bought a Mustang, his dream car. He could afford it because he was on a full scholarship, so earning the money for a car was just a matter of saving. The day he got it, he brought it into work to show it off and we came to check it out. He had the bright idea to do laps around the block. Faster and faster. It was late-ish hours, and the office buildings around our shopping complex were emptied out. It didn't end well. On one lap, he overtook a turn and ended up going straight with the car sideways, tumbling over the curb and landing on top of a utility box. He wasn't badly hurt, but he was arrested for reckless driving, losing his scholarship, and not getting his visa renewed. I'm not sure if he was deported, but he wasn't there the next semester. Story 58. I was following a coworker into work back in 2012. He was on a motorcycle and I was in my Accord. He accelerated toward a green light on his bike, but a bus was making a permissive left, as the driver did not see him as he approached from behind an underpass. He hit the bus completely perpendicular at probably 70 to 80 miles per hour, and the glass on the bus practically exploded. I stopped behind him having witnessed this. He was on the ground, conscious and breathing, but not completely alert. Then an off-duty EMT pulled up within seconds. My vehicle was so close behind the crash, when the cops arrived, they put cones and flares around my vehicle as if it was part of the scene. I explained what happened to the cop and he let me go. I drove into work and told my boss what happened, and with the adrenaline going, I straight up said, I don't think he's going to live. They were stumped. Some even thought I was joking. He died later that day in the hospital from his injuries. I think he was like 21. Very sad. To this day, I also remember how I felt in the days after it. I wouldn't call it depressed or even upset. It was more of a feeling of complete bewilderment. I can relate it to how I felt in the weeks after 9/11. I wasn't crying or afraid, just an overwhelming feeling of what the hell. Don't think it really hit me that he was gone until a few weeks later. I've always checked for motorcycles even more carefully after that day. Story 59. I have a close friend I would hang out with all the time. His parents were divorced and his dad was a drunk and abusive. His mom, though, was super nice and amazing. He'd stay at his mother's during the weekend most weekends, but stayed at his dad's occasionally. Well, one day his mother passed away. His stepdad who lived with her was kicked out by my friend's dad and grandmother, who ransacked the house, destroyed the will, sold all the cars in the house, and forced my friend to live at his dad's house. Everything that should have been passed down to him was stolen by his grandmother, who they never even talked to. He never did anything wrong in that period of time, but I stood by him and watched as his grandmother and dad tore through everything in his mom's house, selling all of the valuables and destroyed what wasn't valuable. Even the stepfather's possessions were destroyed or sold, and even the fridge was emptied out on the lawn just because, quote, "It was her food. You don't deserve any of it." That was the reasoning behind putting a person on the streets homeless with no food. The grandmother also brought the pets they had to the pound, which is sad because those pets were amazing. Story 60. Every once in a while I'm haunted by the vision of one night. I was at a Ruby Tuesdays with my family and we hear a very loud, "What?" followed with, "My dad just died." Then noticed a mom, dad, and 2 kids rushing out of the building. I don't know them, and I think of them often. Close second is when I was the first third-party witness and responded to a motorcycle accident. This guy in front of me was making his left turn into his driveway, but then I hear a loud crash and see an older man flying about 20 feet through the air, crumpling headfirst onto the pavement right next to my car. I immediately called a 911, and a neighbor came out and gave me the address, and I made sure the guy didn't move or vomit. He was in shock, couldn't say many words. My guess is due to both the shock and probably a few broken ribs, but he responded to his name. I waited for the paramedics and the police to come give my report, and then they sent me on my way to never hear about it again. Story 61. My dad collapsed one Sunday afternoon and had a seizure. He was ambulanced to hospital and all of us family were close behind. When we got to the hospital, we were brought straight into this room off the emergency room that was quiet and had some... When we got to the hospital, we were brought straight into this room off the emergency room that was quiet and had some more comfortable chairs. Tea was available too. My aunts and uncles and extended family were arriving quickly and we all squeezed into the room. Everyone was nervous and anxious. I remember being sick to my stomach because my dad was back there somewhere and something was taking so long. Soon a doctor came in and called for my mum, who was an absolute wreck. They left and spoke privately across the hall. Out of nowhere, I hear my mum sobbing and screaming, and everyone in the room started crying. Dad had a tumor bigger than a golf ball in the center of his brain. He required emergency surgery the very next day and was on life support when they helicoptered him to the other hospital. It ended up being super aggressive and cancerous. They gave him 3 months, but he stayed a year. Miss him every second. Story 62. My GF had to go to a family party, so for some reason she didn't want to go. She's even invited me. However, I've told her I had something to do. She and her family left in the morning. However, from that night, I haven't heard from her. I even joked about it, saying, maybe they had an accident and someone died with some friends. The next day, I received a call from one of her neighbors. The neighbors had my number just because one day my girlfriend's dad was being aggressive toward my girlfriend and her mom, and this neighbor asked for my number just in case. She told me that my girlfriend and her family had an accident and her dad passed away. My girlfriend knew about her dad after 1 month when she was almost leaving the hospital. She and her sister were in the same room when their relatives told them. The only reason they'd discovered it so late was because her family was afraid to tell them, so they told them when they were about to be discharged from the hospital. To screw everything up even more, I didn't go to the hospital that day after going there for 1 month straight. Their relatives didn't tell me they were going to talk about that. I've received some angry messages from them saying why I didn't go to the hospital and I screwed everything up. I went to the hospital every day for 1.5 months. The only day I didn't go was the most important. Screw off, why didn't they tell me? At that time, I was her emotional support. She even blamed me for a period of time. Story 63. A few years ago, I lived in Asia and worked in the hospitality industry. Part of my job, among other things, was to assist clients in need. You know the types of things: lost passports, illnesses, etc. I received a call at 8 a.m. from the hotel manager. One of my clients had hurt himself and was currently in the hospital. I was given the phone number of the hotel representative who was with the young man and his friend at the hospital. Speaking to the friend, I was told, "I cannot wait for you to come. I can't handle this. I've had operations and I have panic attacks, so I'm leaving." "You're leaving your friend in the ER alone?" I asked, and yup, he was. I drove down to the hospital and the doctors told me they needed someone who could authorize surgery for the young man whose name is Daniel. Quickly, I drove to the hotel and picked up 2 of Daniel's friends. Unbelievably, his girlfriend was asleep and would not be woken up to come to the hospital. We returned to the hospital where the doctors had Daniel on a stretcher ready to go to the next hospital for emergency surgery. In the next time, I had to do the right thing and contact his family. Somehow, I don't remember how, I got the phone number for Daniel's mother, and I quickly called her to inform her that her son had been involved in an accident at the hotel and that he was currently being transferred to another hospital. I promised to be in touch as soon as I had more news. Around 40 minutes later, I arrived at the other hospital with one of the 2 friends, who were aged 17 and 19. One friend had traveled in the ambulance with a Daniel. Upon arrival at the second hospital, the friend walked out, put his head on his young girlfriend's shoulder, and I knew the news wasn't good. Daniel had died. A million thoughts went through my head. Should I notify the consulate? The police? What should I do? I had never been in this position before, and I decided I had to do what I would want someone to do if it were me. So I called Daniel's mother. She was beside herself, so her husband took the call. I said, "I've just arrived at the hospital and I don't know what to say to you. I have no good news to tell you, unfortunately. Daniel has passed away. I am so sorry." There were no other words I could get out. I promised to call back soon, as I had these 2 kids in the car hysterical, and I had to get them back to their friends. The drive to the hotel was in complete silence. As we pulled into the hotel, I asked if they wanted me to tell their friends, or if they wanted to. They asked me to. Oh God, how do I do this? These people's lives are going to completely change as of this minute. Deep breath, and in I go. We told the friend who had left him at the hospital, and he walked off yelling and punching things. I told his other friends and his girlfriend's mother, who was traveling with them. I then asked where the girlfriend was. She's asleep, I was told. Asleep? When her boyfriend had been rushed to the hospital, bleeding to death. Anyway, we woke her, and I broke the news, and it was horrible. In the coming days, I assisted the friends with police interviews, consular assistance, and liaising with insurance companies. I entered the blood-stained room where the accident happened and literally had Daniel's blood up to my shoulders when washing Daniel's shorts in the bathtub so I could give them to his girlfriend. Daniel's family flew in, and they were absolutely lovely. They wanted to know everything I had. So we sat down and I told them everything I knew. I didn't hold back any details. After a week, it was over. Daniel had been repatriated back home. The friends, and I used that term very loosely, left, and the family went home. My days were 18 hours long for a week. I lived and breathed this young man and wanted to do everything I could to handle the situation with dignity for Daniel. I believe I did that. Not a day goes by where I don't think of him. I think about whether I could have handled it better and made it easier for his family. Maybe I could have said something differently. Could I have somehow saved him? So, on that day, not just one life changed. Mine definitely did. The life of Daniel's family did. I'm not really sure how affected the girlfriend and her friends and family are, to be honest. That's not something I say lightly. I honestly believe they were not the good friends he thought they were. So that's my life-changing story, relived again and written through tears. Daniel, if you know I'm writing this, you are never far from my mind. We never met in this lifetime, but we will in the next. Story 64. I'll never forget this. This is before the time of cell phones. I was about 12 when during class, the principal walks in and asks, let's call her Anne, to come with him. Anne didn't want to come along. I didn't do anything wrong. In hindsight, being annoying because of, puberty. Classroom laughs. Principal, you're not in trouble. I just need you to come with me. I need to talk to you in private. I don't care, you can tell me here. Classroom laughs about principal being uncomfortable. No, you have to come with me. It concerns your family. What's with them? Come with me now. No. Silence. Then the principal says, your dad just had an accident and died. Absolute silence. Anne turned pale, froze for a few minutes, took her bag and left the classroom. Absolute A-bomb. The whole classroom was silent. Class got dismissed. Nobody really knew what to do or say. Story 65. Long ago, I worked security at a mall. Crappy job, but it paid bills. I picked up a lost and found purse and took it to the mall office to turn into the lost and found. Normally, we have a witness as we inventory it, looking for name and contact information. On the weekends, the mall hired off-duty cops to work as well. Sort of an on-call, on-scene patrol. They were bored and decided to inventory the purse, in which they found a fake ID along with a pill bottle containing some weed. Still illegal in my state. This was over a decade ago. The person's phone was in the bag, so the cops used the phone to call mom and dad and were having a conversation with them. as I left the office to go back to walking around. As soon as I get up to the food court area, a lady asked me if a purse had been found, and I confirmed her name, radioed the office to let them know, and I brought her there. I walked her to the office where the cops were in the conference room, and as soon as she walked in, I turned around and walked away. I didn't want to see the aftermath. Maybe not a life-ruining event, but a crappy day indeed. Story 66. A friend of mine, military veteran, hard worker, great guy in general, went against his in-laws' wishes by allowing their other daughter and her kids to stay with him to get back on their feet. They warned him it was a bad idea, that she and her kids were vicious to the core, and that she was a narcissist who would turn on him the moment she felt like it, saying there was no depth to which she wouldn't sink. He's now in prison, accused of assaulting one of her kids. He's black and she's white. He said he knew he would be convicted the moment the accusation was brought up, just because he had no faith in the justice system. Seems he was right. There was no physical evidence, only statements. There is crap all I can do to help. I have no expectation that that woman or her kids will ever recant. Absolutely no doubt in my mind that he is innocent. My only real hope for his exoneration is that someday brain scanners get to the point they can invent the perfect lie detector and prove his innocence. Story 67. It was close to the end of term. There were always a few people who don't come in the last few days because, as most of us know, you don't do much then. So this guy in my grade, I didn't know him that well, left for an early vacation with his family. They drove up from my town to another, which was quite literally on the other side of the country. They drove through the night. It was him, 13 at the time. His younger sister, not sure how old, It was him, 13 at the time. His younger sister, not too sure how old she was, roughly 9 or so. His mom and his dad in the car. Story goes with his dad falling asleep behind the wheel, causing them to collide head-on with a truck. Totaled the car, basically nothing left. Everyone unfortunately died, excluding the truck driver, which is at least some sort of silver lining if you're really looking for one. It really hit me hard. I didn't know this guy at all, spoke to him maybe once or twice, but it was really the first time I kind of had to deal with someone that I saw regularly dying. To think that a whole family can just be taken out, just like that, kind of puts things in perspective, don't you think? Let it be a reminder that if you feel like you are too tired to drive, just pull over if you have to wherever you are and take a nap. Just find somewhere to stop, basically. Because even if you manage to stay awake, you are straight up impaired. Keep yourself safe and other people on the road safe as well. Story 68. Going to try to make this short. Work as an income tax preparer. 2 years ago, a lady came in. Started off as not a good year since her husband had been laid off from his longtime job and things weren't easy for them. They ended up getting a tax refund at least, so that was good. Fast forward a month and they had gotten a new tax document for distribution from her husband's parents' trust. Had to amend return. Ended up making them owe quite a bit in taxes, which was the first bummer. I asked if his parents were still alive or if it was an estate distribution. Turns out they both lost their lives when their car was hit by a truck. It was local and I looked up the name. There was nothing left of the car in the photo on news website, just crushed. Fast forward a year, and some lady comes into the office and says she's had a crazy year. I jokingly say, I hope you mean that in a good way, like you won the lottery or started a successful business. No. Youngest daughter took her own life. Husband found her and attempted CPR. During CPR, husband had a massive heart attack, was placed on life support and also passed away. Finished her return, immediately went to my boss and said, I can't charge her a dime. Boss agreed. The office was mostly silent the rest of the day after everyone had heard her story. Story 69. My mom's neighbor fell out of bed and hit his head and died in his sleep. His teenage son found him the next morning. Obviously, that would be life-altering. He apparently lived with his dad because his mom was in a mental institution. He went to go live with his aunt, but I guess that wasn't going well, so he was basically being passed around by different family members, and he said that he could tell that nobody wanted him around, which is sad. He would come back to the house and my mom would always talk to him when she would see him. The last time my mom saw him, she said that he seemed like he was at peace with everything, and he seemed to be doing really well. My mom called me in tears the next day because, well, he ended up taking his own life after he talked to my mom. She said he basically thanked her for listening to him and always being so nice to him. That kid's dad dying basically ruined his life. Story 70. Feel like this is rather late, but mine. When I was in 14, I came home to the sound of gunshots as I was walking in the door. I ran to the neighbors and called 911. The police arrived and I could sort of hear them talking outside saying seriously injured, which I thought meant badly hurt but alive. One officer came to sit with me and told me my mother was dead. My father was the one who did it. The only thing that came out of my mouth was, Okay, there's a lot more to the story, but it drastically changed my life. I came from a small, quiet Christian town, and I had my future planned out. I was a good kid with good grades, super quiet, hanging around church all the time with my friends, playing piano, reading my books. My life was headed in this one direction, and in that one night, it took a complete 90-degree turn. I lost my parents, my home, even my beloved pets. Sometimes it feels like an alternate timeline to what should be. There's no telling what my life would have turned out to be if this didn't happen, of course, but I have zero doubt it would be drastically different. Story 71. One of my cousins was involved in a hit and run. She hit somebody, panicked, and drove off and then returned to the scene less than a few hours later. She was arrested and sent to serve 12 months in jail. At the time, she had a toddler and a young son at home. They were forced to live with her grandma because of this. It's almost been a decade since then. Her son has never forgiven her. He started acting out while she was incarcerated, and it only got worse when she got back. Her daughter cried and cried every day for weeks. Her daughter is a very soft-spoken girl now, doesn't really trust many people. Her son has since run away from home, gotten in trouble at school, and refuses to talk to his mom because of what happened when he was a child. My cousin acts like it never happened, refuses to talk about it, and disowned her son. She acts like he never existed and like nothing that happened was her fault. She's since gotten married and had 2 kids with her husband, and he has 3 from a previous marriage that she plays mom to. She acts like they're her biological kids but ignores the first son she had. He resents her so much for that, and frankly, I can't say I completely blame him. It doesn't help that she had him when she was 18 and never provided him with the life that she's given her other kids, including her husband's. He's the one who's been left out and forgotten and caught sleeping in his school because he has nowhere else to go. I think his life was ruined more than hers. Story 72. Oh boy, I've told this story a lot, but every time I think about it, it puts a smile on my face. My school district superintendent was a jerk. My little brother has autism, and when he first entered the district, my mom gathered a bunch of questions from her friends who also had kids on the spectrum to ask him at the upcoming PTA meeting, since most of them couldn't make it. She asked him the question, "Do you know anyone with a disability?" to see if he had prior experience working with disabled people, since she needed to know if he needed help when it came to working with my brother. This man straight up replies, "Well, I don't know if you know this, but I was adopted." How the hell does that answer her question in any way, shape, or form? Later, he gets fed up with her asking questions and tries to shut her down by saying, "Does anyone have questions beside Mrs. Blank?" After the PTA meeting, one of the moms bickered to her that she was trying to make him look bad when she was literally just trying to help her kid. Thus spiraled my intense hatred of him, starting from elementary school. So I already hated this man, and longed to see some dirt on his back. Well, New Year's of this year rolls around and everyone's having a jolly good time. January 2nd, I just get home from my clarinet lesson and I get a text from my friend reading, "Did you see everything with the Dr. McJerk?" as I will be calling him from now on. I said no. She sends me a screenshot of a Facebook post that Dr. McJerk's wife posted the night of New Year's Day. It read, "Hey guys, guess who fell in love and want to be together? Dr. McJerk and the principal of the high school. Isn't that fun? My husband and his employee sat at my kitchen table tonight and let me know they're in love with each other and he is leaving me. And somehow they both want to make it my fault when, in actuality, they're liars and cheaters." I was shocked. I opened up Instagram and was immediately smacked in the face with a slew of memes being posted about the situation. One of my close friends started a whole meme account dedicated to the affair. Someone even wrote him his own diss track and put it on SoundCloud. Later, we found out his doctorate wasn't real, and it was from a mill. Crap really hit the fan, and hey, what did I do? I reveled in it. It was glorious to see him fall to his knees so quickly and lose the respect of almost the entire school district in less than 24 hours. There was no going back from this. It was all over the news and social media. Turns out that Dr. McJerk's wife and the principal of our high school were really close friends. And the principal lived in the apartment below them to add insult to injury. So after a month of waiting, he has finally negotiated to leave his position, and the principal couldn't show up to her termination meeting because she was pregnant with their child. Still makes me smile when I look back through all the memes and posts. He was a jerk to a lot of people behind the scenes and honestly, got what he deserved. Story 73. My mom got sick and went into the hospital. I was 7 at the time and she was 29. A week later, her parents and brother flew in from across the country. I was pretty dense and didn't realize anything was up. 2 days later, my dad was supposed to be back from the hospital to take us all out for dinner. He was late and my mom's parents were talking very badly about him. When he finally came home, he looked broken. He didn't say anything, but my mom's parents turned white. They left without a word. Dad left me, my younger brother, and sister just standing there while he went to his bedroom. I made sandwiches or something, I don't remember, and put them to bed. Sometime in the middle of the night, Dad woke me up and told me Mom wasn't coming home anymore. I wailed for 3 days straight. My dad's life was pretty much ruined that day. My mom was everything to him. He never really recovered from losing her, threw himself into work and into being a drunkard and an abusive piece of crap. My mom's parents lost a child, so they were pretty broken after that as well. Don't know how they coped because I never saw or heard from them again. That day when I was 7 and my dad came home, then my grandparents left without a word, Dad left without a word, and then later told me that my mom had left also without a word, all leaving me, 7, in charge of 2 small children, 4 and 3. I had abandonment issues until my late 40s. Still have them somewhat, but am better now. After my mom died, my brother, sister, and I were in and out of foster care. Removed from home due to physical abuse only to be abused in foster care later. We're all still a little screwed up from that. After the foster care, Dad finally got into a stable relationship with a woman almost as mean and abusive as he was. Then he moved us all to another country where the abuse continued. I wound up with a concussion, a broken arm, welts, cigarette burns, and wound up in the psych ward for attempting to take my own life. Spent about 75% of my years from 13 to 24 in the psych ward. Thought I had it the worst out of us 3 kids. Last I heard, my brother was caught dealing drugs and went to prison. I lost track of my sister when I was in my early 20s. Found her again when I was 40. Found out my dad assaulted her from when she was 10 until she ran away at 17. The reason I lost track of her is because she was in hiding so Dad wouldn't find her. So I think her life was the most ruined in the end. And my poor mom, going from a vibrant woman full of life, a fantastic and enthusiastic mother with a young family, to a hospital bed, realizing she would never see her family again. I can't imagine the horror she felt in that hospital. Story 74. Was at a local bar that had a mechanical bull on Thursday nights. Watched as the friends of some hammer dude talked him into riding the bull. Poor guy didn't last long. He kissed the bull hard within a couple of seconds, falling onto the blow-up bounce house type pad that lined the floor. His friends had really riled him up beforehand, so everyone in the bar was watching the incident. We all thought it was hilarious at the time, but in retrospect, I feel terrible about laughing at the guy because I was under the impression he was fine. What's the worst that could happen? Bloody nose? Guy falls, doesn't move. Friends hop in the arena to rouse him. Note, please don't ever move someone you suspect of having a neck injury. It can often make matters much worse for the injured person. Dude isn't moving despite their attempts to wake him up. 911 is called. The mood in the whole place went from 100 to 0 real quick, as we realized how grave of a situation it had become. 15 minutes go by and he's still laying there motionless. Paramedics arrive and take him to the ER. 2 weeks later, I'm having lunch with my girlfriend and a coworker from her new job. I'm telling this story from the bar a couple weeks back, and my girl's friend gets this weird look on her face and starts tearing up. She explains that she just got married to the guy that fell off the bull. I stopped eating and promptly inserted my foot into my mouth, of course. Unfortunately, the trauma from the fall caused severe paralysis to his cervical spine, ultimately leading to him becoming a quadriplegic. Dude had to go to his own wedding confined to the same wheelchair he'll spend the rest of his life in. I don't think I had ever considered the risks of a mechanical bull before. Like, I've seen them and I've been like, oh, that's goofy, that's fun. I have never once thought you could get hurt on them. I don't know why. Like, thinking about it, it's kind of obvious. But this just sucks, man. Spinal injuries will do that to you. And at the very least, I hope he's still enjoying his life. But that is absolutely brutal. I'm assuming your girlfriend's coworker, who ended up being his wife, didn't leave him after this, because that would make things a lot worse. But still, definitely a turn for the worse in that life. Story 75. My aunt. For context, she survived cancer. Hummed and hawed about going in for chemo, but my cousins and a few doctors said it would be a good idea because of the type of cancer she had, as it would come back in 5 to 10 years with a vengeance. So on the 16th of May, she went in for her first round of chemo. The 18th, she started to not feel well, which was usual for chemo patients. We see her on the 21st, drop off some rhubarb and strawberry crisp. She complains about a sore stomach and having a bad case of the runs. She looked fine otherwise. She has anxiety, so the runs is usual for her. We talked to her on the 23rd, and she's doing okay. Had plans to get the poppies she grows for seeds to sell over to our house that weekend. 25th, around 7:30 to 8, we get a call from one of my cousins. Auntie is in the hospital with a massive bruise on her right leg. She's going in for a CT scan soon. They think it's a blood clot. She's in a lot of pain. Couldn't stand up without help. Okay, a blood clot, and she's in pain, couldn't walk. We can go to the hospital tomorrow and see her. 9:30 she goes for the CT, 10:30 another phone call. She has flesh-eating disease that has spread from her injection site from the medication she had to take pre-chemo all the way down to her foot. She has to be airlifted to the next available hospital. We rush there, and the second I see her, all I can see is how much she looks like my grandmother when she was dying. Her right leg had a massive bruise, wrapping from the inside of her right thigh by the knee to across her thigh and up her hip and her abdomen. It was a deep, deep purple, barely conscious. She looked at me and said, "Ray, am I going to wake up with my leg? I'm scared. I'm so scared." 12:30 to 1:30, she is rushed into emergency surgery to remove the affected tissue in her leg. I stayed up until there was word that her son was there and she made it. And she did. 3 to 4 p.m. on the 26th. She's airlifted to a bigger hospital. 7 to 9, she goes in for a second surgery. 1 a.m., they took her entire right leg directly out of the socket. Her kidneys are failing from all the heavy antibiotics she's on, and they're fighting to flush out the chemo. 24 hours. It took her 24 hours to go from walking and talking and being herself to laying in a hospital bed in a medicated coma, missing a leg she didn't want to lose. Story 76. So this came from my lecturer for first aid. She said that she was teaching a class about first aid and that one of the students was late. When he finally showed up, he was oddly dressed in black clothes and was wearing makeup, a very goth kind of style. And he was in his late 30s, early 40s. So my lecturer went on with the class, and when they got up to doing CPR on the dummies, the man couldn't. He kept asking her to cover the eyes, which she just encouraged him to do his best. It's been over 2 hours now, and the class is finished. He is still there, unable to perform CPR on the dummy. So my lecturer finally asks why he struggles to carry it out. He tells her, when he was young in his early 20s, he and his mates and their girlfriends went out to the beach for the day. It was a good day. Nothing too eventful happened. That was until the drive home, where the car with all their girlfriends had a head-on collision with a truck. And when he got up to the car, he went to pull his girlfriend out, and as he did, she split in two. She had been completely severed from the waist down and died as a result. So he had therapy, counseling, medication, and I think he finally mustered up the courage to learn what to do if it happened again. Our class was silent after that. Story 77. Not really in a single day, but the woman who lived on the other side of the street of my parents had a really rough week. She lost her mother to old age and lung cancer on Tuesday, funeral set for Sunday. During the funeral, her daughter gets stung by a bee, she goes into allergic shock, then into a coma and died before the end of the week. The woman's husband couldn't handle the stress of seeing his daughter like that and had an attack. He survived, but is now mostly paralyzed and can't talk, and he doesn't seem to understand most of what you say to him. She went from being a nice lady, always taking care of her garden or pets, to never going out of her house and sulking constantly. Story 78. When I worked in law enforcement, a very good friend of mine was working with me in the county jail at the time. Her husband was deployed in Iraq. While we were on shift, she got a call that her husband had been hit by a roadside bomb. He survived, but the look on her face that night was one of complete devastation. Then, fast forward about a year, she had decided to apply for a deputy position on the road and got it. While she was on a night shift one night, we all heard over the dispatch that a call came into her address as a medical. Her and her sergeant raced over there, but the city police told her to not go inside. Her teenage son had shot himself in the head. Come to find out later that his girlfriend at the time was pregnant with his baby, but she had turned to drugs to cope, so she couldn't raise it. My coworker and her husband raised their own grandchild. Luckily, I don't believe he had any lasting side effects from the mother's drug use. She is such a freaking sick person. She dealt with all of this and has overcome a lot of pain and tragedy in her life. Story 79. It's a day, week, and 1 year later. The time my ex-boyfriend told me he thought I was part of his imagination, and a week later he was committed against his will to get help because he had plans to take his own life with argon gas and large oven bags taped together. He told his shrink he was going to take his own life because he couldn't get a doctor's note for being out of work on FMLA. Help was called and I ran my overweight butt around a building to try to talk to him, but he got his car and started to drive. The firefighters asked for my help, but he would not talk to me, so they had to force him out of the car and then took him to the hospital ER. I spent New Year's and nights searching for weapons at his apartment and home with his best friend. They said he was better, but that was a lie. I'm not willing to share details. I was told because of mental health issues they wanted to talk to anyone who could help him with some bad choices. It didn't take long for me to get the guts to leave after that. I take 3 antidepressants to help me cope with how this relationship played out and the damage it caused. Thank God for my shrink to help me see it wasn't my fault. He had more issues and baggage than someone like me could deal with, and I didn't see that. I just saw a sad boy who needed love. Story 80. I was about 19 years old and was with my boyfriend at the time. We were driving down a 6-lane road in Plantation, Florida at about midnight one night. There was basically no traffic at the time. There had been a concert at what was then the Hollywood Sportatorium, so there was an occasional car passing by heading home. At one point, a red El Camino came flying past us at an unbelievable rate of speed. We were in the far right lane going pretty slow at this point. I looked down into my lap for a split second and my boyfriend started saying, "No, no, no, oh my god, no!" And within the next 2 seconds or so, I immediately looked at him thinking something was wrong with the car, and I noticed him glaring straight ahead. I looked in the direction he was going and saw the red El Camino still driving but considerably slower, having just passed a pedestrian who was walking in the far outside lane about a mile ahead. I noticed that this pedestrian had taken what appeared to be a leather jacket by the arm and threw it into the air. It wasn't until a second later when it hit the ground and bounced violently that I realized it was a human body. There had been 2 teens who attended the concert and were walking home. The El Camino hit one of them so hard that he was propelled incredibly high into the air and lost his life instantly. Sadly, he was almost home, as he lived not far from where this occurred. My boyfriend was in shock and just kept repeating "no" over and over as we drove by. I had my head down as I couldn't bring myself to look at the young man or his friend, and I asked my boyfriend if he was okay, to which my boyfriend flat out said no. After driving around in a complete daze looking for the police, we finally found a payphone. There were no cell phones at the time. We called the police. I couldn't sleep for a long time, and I will never forget that. Story 81. My ex and I were trying to work things out between us after he had cheated and lied to me like 5 times. I had gone crazy on his butt, and he made me believe everything was my fault, even though the cheating happened first and the crazy happened after, but whatever. He texted me telling me he had a girl who liked him. I told him to tell her he was taken. He said he would if I bought him a knife, so I bought it for him and showed him the receipt. He then said, "Actually, I'm going to choose a person over a knife," and blocked me. So I joined the server he met the girl in and sent her a Word document with every screenshot of his cheating, as well as a list of people to contact if she wanted to confirm my story, and a video of him telling me to end my life multiple times. She showed this to the server, they banned him, she cut ties with him, etc. Now, in between this and the next part, I found out that he'd been staying up all night with this girl for about a week now. When he was telling me he was too tired to screw, he was up all night with her on the phone. When he asked me for the best pictures I had of him, he was asking so he could impress her. This made me pretty angry. I then called his mom. And now, this is where I made a mistake. I pretended to be my mom to have some semblance of authority and told her everything. Then I felt like crap, called back and told her the truth. She still sided with me, told me her son was a piece of crap, offered to reimburse me for the money I spent on gifts for him and the money I spent visiting him, about $1,000. I felt bad about this and refused, but she said, "Don't worry, I'll take it from his account." And she pushed and pushed, so I gave her my routing number and she sent the money. She also made him delete all of his social media. The next day she decided we should all stop talking to each other. So my ex lost his friends, the girl he cheated with, his money, his longtime loyal girlfriend, and his social media all in one day. Oh yeah, sounds like there were some problems there. A lot of problems there. And I'm not trying to rag on them, but I think OP has some self-esteem issues too. Or at least had. Maybe they've worked on them since then. But like 5 times? Yeesh. You can find a better man, trust me. It won't be hard. Story 82. Me and my girlfriend of 2 years were sleeping in one morning and she kept getting phone calls from her grandpa. The first time he called, I heard it and it woke me up, but not my girlfriend. I didn't think anything of it and just went back to sleep. He called a few more times and it finally woke us both up completely and she answered it. He said that she needs to get herself together and come over to her Nana's house ASAP. It freaked her out immediately and she knew something was wrong. On our way there, she told me she knew someone had passed away but didn't know who. She was thinking it was her mom or her Nana. When we got there, I stayed in the car because I didn't want to intrude on anything. It wasn't my blood family after all. One of her family members came out and told me what happened. Her older brother died of an overdose. He was 24 and the best person I've ever met in my life. He lived with her Nana because he was struggling with things lately and her Nana found him. My girlfriend didn't even think it was going to be him. I've never seen a family be so torn apart. I can't imagine how fast it took for everything she knew to be taken away from her. All of the good and happy feelings she had disappeared as soon as she figured out it was him. My girlfriend's heart was, and still is, shattered to this day. The night before it happened, her brother messaged her something from her Snapchat story just saying that she's hilarious and he loves her. It was so normal. It blows my mind how that night everything was amazing. Life was so good. And then a few hours later, everything changed. Her entire life changed. Story 83. My sister called my phone one night at about 3:30 a.m. She told me her daughter was in the ER. I went and picked up our dad, had to wake him up, and we went to the hospital. My niece was lying there in a coma. She was 18 and had this horribly abusive boyfriend that we all hated who beat her up. She was 4'8", 85 pounds, was very frail due to PIS. He got her into H and stuff. We couldn't convince her to get away from the guy. She was in love. So earlier this night, they were in this really sleazy hotel shooting up. I guess they got some bad dope or something. I never got the whole story. So he shot her up. She was unresponsive and the guy just dips. Runs away, alerting no one. Afraid of getting in trouble. Some hotel staff happened upon her some minutes or maybe hours later. So we were in the waiting room when the doc came out and told my sis that she, daughter, was going to die. Sister and I went outside and sat on a bench, and she collapsed into my lap/arms and sobbed in a way that I'd never remotely heard before. Chilled me to the bone. We went inside and all stood around her bed, held her hands and shoulder and talked into her ears, saying last sentiments and goodbyes. The doc turned off the machines, and she faded away. This was 3 years ago. My sister hasn't recovered. Not at all. She's just hanging on by a thread, really. We tried to bring charges against the abusive boyfriend, but there wasn't enough evidence. We did bring him to trial for the abuse, but we lost the trial as a niece wasn't around to testify, even though there was substantially more evidence. Photos of injuries corroborated with eyewitness accounts. It was an outrage. Story 84. My son was 10. His bike riding buddy was 7. They were riding bikes right at the onset of dusk. We lived on a rural road that was occasionally used as a cut-through for the local high school traffic. The boys had been outside all afternoon, were in their territory, and it was just another day, until they decided to race down that gravel hill, just beyond the tree line and into the road. An oncoming minivan driven by a teacher from the high school couldn't see the boys, and knocked my son's little 7-year-old friend into the air, and onto the side of that rural road. I'll never forget the screeching noise the minivan's tires made as the teacher tried to stop the vehicle. My then 10-year-old son was standing there in shock, speechless, horrified, terrified, and haunted by the trauma he witnessed that day. The screams of his little friend's mom as she ran towards the road, realizing mortified that the crumpled pile of flesh was her little boy. My screams as I ran to my son, who had been riding side by side with his friend while they raced, and, quote, should have met the same fate. My significant other's face as he looked up from the boy, blood dripping from his mouth from attempting CPR. My son is now almost 20. It took him until about a year ago to finally accept the accident wasn't his fault, and that it is okay for him to still be alive. Survivor's guilt can torment adult brains easily. I can't imagine what it would do to a 10-year-old. And yeah, you can blame the kids, oh, it was a bad decision. But they're kids, man. They're gonna do stuff like this. It's hard for me to call it anything but a freak accident. I'm glad your son is doing better, OP. It really isn't his fault. Story 85. Not a person, but I felt that I ruined 5 dogs' lives one time at work. I work for an auction and almost everything we sell comes from people who passed away. This estate was very fresh. The guy was busted for growing about 3,000 marijuana plants and he was only permitted for 99. He was 78 years old and didn't want to deal with the consequences, so he got his will together, walked off the property to the street, and shot himself. We were contacted by the nephew who inherited everything on the property. He lived out of state and only wanted to check, nothing else. We started the inventory process a week after. There was still blood on the street. The guy had 5 dogs and they were all sweethearts. Someone else inherited the property itself and he was keeping the dogs. I'm from California and we have to smog every car we sell or we can't sell it to a Californian resident. The guy who died had an '05 Dodge Ram with a Cummins diesel. We worked at the property for a few days and the dogs were always happy to see us. The following day when I drove the truck back, I pulled up to the front gate in that guy's truck. All 5 dogs come running as fast as they can and looked the happiest they've been all week. Then I realized they weren't happy to see me. They thought their dad was home. The wagging tails stopped and they just moped. It tore me apart. Story 86. Coworker's husband is on disability due to a serious back injury from a few years ago. No longer able to work in construction. Coworker is the breadwinner for the family, working here in the IT industry. One of their kids is in college, the other is in senior year of high school. Husband has a detached garage that has a TV, couch, mini fridge where he watches football with his buddies. They live out in the country and he keeps a .22 rifle out there to shoot raccoons, groundhogs, etc. Coworker goes out there one day to get something out of the garage. Their dog knocks over the .22 and it discharges, hitting her in the leg. It severs the femoral artery. She bleeds out on the floor of his detached garage. After 20 minutes or so, he realizes she hasn't come back, goes out to discover that his irresponsible gun handling, safety off, gun loaded, leaning against something, has led to the quick, lonely, and undeserved death of his wife, who had been supporting his broke butt. Screw you, dude. D, you are missed, and you deserved better than that. Story 87. There was this one kid in my 8th grade class. He was the generic straight A student, captain of the football team, had the lead cheerleader as a girlfriend, and an overachiever. Then one day he was called down to the principal's office. He came back to class about 10 minutes later, crying. He grabbed all of his things and left. Later that day, I biked over to his house and asked him what happened. He told me he had gotten his girlfriend pregnant. Being in a school deeply rooted in Christian values, they were both expelled. Then his girlfriend dumped him and all his other friends abandoned him. He moved before the end of the school year. His girlfriend got an abortion and also moved. Although she had lost all of her friends as well, it was probably for the best she got the abortion. She probably saved thousands of dollars and she can still keep her life in order. The boy is bullied at his new school because somebody found out what happened and he attempted to take his own life. I hope he gets better and can move on. I would wager to guess that these kids were not educated about what would happen with intimate activities, just taking a few hints from what was said. In my opinion, this is much more a failing of the schooling system than any kid. After all, they're kids, they don't really know what they're doing or consequences. Dude said 8th grade. Like, come on, that sucks. I hope he's doing better now too. Story 88. While I'm running the self-checkout lanes at the grocery store I work for, there was this woman who approached me and asked if I'd seen her telephone, as she couldn't find it. I called it for her and we didn't hear it, so I asked if she had an iPhone because I also have one, and we could use Find iPhone to see the location. She does, and she signs into it on my phone. We see her phone is moving away from us, so someone must have stolen it. Because she had left the store and then came back, she didn't know exactly when it happened. So I pulled up her receipt on the system and found the exact timestamp of when she left. Then my coworker scanned the security cameras to see who came after her. On the app, we see that a thief is at a pawn shop, so I call the shop and tell them not to accept a phone if someone tries to pawn it off. So that crisis is averted. Next, the woman and I call the police, as my friend has a physical description of the guy who stole the phone. I recognize the guy from earlier that day because I overheard him talking with one of his friends about where he was going. So we tell the officer, who leaves with the woman, and they go to get the phone back. After they go, my other coworker says that someone who matches my description of the guy tried to buy gift cards with a bunch of different debit cards. So he pulls those receipts up. We send the card numbers to the woman who has the police officer check his wallet when they arrive. The cop called me back and said he got arrested. I don't know the exact charge, but he had some serious dark web money laundering type stuff going on. It was with a bunch of other cards and random crap we hadn't even been looking for. It was a lot of wrong place, wrong time for him, but really funny in hindsight. Story 89. In my high school, one of the popular kids, a well-loved football player, got drunk at a party and drove his friends home. He swerved off the road and hit a tree. One of the passengers lost their lives on impact. He put himself in a coma for a few days as well, but made a full physical recovery. Before the accident, he was one of the loudest, most extroverted, high-energy guys in our grade. He loved the spotlight, loved goofing around, mouthing off, always bouncing off the walls. After the accident, I never saw him make eye contact with anyone other than a few of his closest friends. He walked slowly through the halls with his head down. The few times I saw his face, he looked like he was on the verge of tears, and that's probably how he spent every waking second. There were some minor legal repercussions for him, but his father was a high-profile criminal defense attorney, and they were a wealthy, well-connected family, so, you know. The kid didn't get into actual trouble until he got drunk right before meeting his probation officer. Story 90. On a regular day after school in my junior year of high school, I was watching TV. Everything seemed normal. Suddenly, my dad burst out of his room and angrily went outside to go for a drive. I immediately knew something happened. When he got back, he informed my mom and I that his best friend since childhood had overdosed on H. He was supposed to be flying to Vermont, we live in Florida, the next weekend to stage an intervention with his friends and family to get him help. But now, he was going to attend a funeral. Apparently, his friend had called him the day before too, but my dad was busy and was going to give him a call back that day instead. He was racked with guilt and wouldn't stop saying he should have answered the goddamn phone. He didn't stop crying until he left. I would wake up every morning for school and hear him crying in his room. This is one of the most heart-wrenching memories of my father, and the only time I've seen him break down. Story 91. My ex-wife's brother took the family fortune. They used to own 13 drugstores, 2 liquor stores, and with it, he played the stock market. He made decent coin, but also lost a crap ton of money. In one day, his father's retirement savings were lost, followed by his mother's savings, and they were self-employed, so they saved up their own money. Now, neither the mom or dad can live comfortably because they have no savings to live on. So at 74 years old, the dad is selling houses with his son, both realtors in our city, and the mom runs a modest Chinese restaurant, feeding her gambling addiction and also helping prop her son and husband. Sadly, the parents will likely work until their health catches up. Dad's knees aren't good anymore, and his hip is starting to give out, all because their son decided to play greedy in the stock market. Story 92. Last summer, I went to stay a couple of nights at my grandparents'. I do this a lot, so nothing unusual. I spend 2 nights there and my mom comes to pick me up. I get in the car and we start the 20-minute drive back home. We go onto the interstate and see this one driver that was driving erratically. He was swerving and at one point almost hit a fence. He continues driving increasingly more erratically as we drive over a bridge. After a while, he drives up a little out of visibility. This was around 9 p.m. on a foggy day, and we hear a loud slam. About 5 seconds later, we see the erratic driver on one side of the interstate and a Jeep turned upside down on the other, close to the edge of the bridge. My mom immediately calls 911. All we could do was keep driving. Didn't hear about either driver, although drunk was walking around just fine. We were all very shaken by this, and I couldn't stop thinking about it for days. Around last Christmas, my mom is subpoenaed to appear as a witness at his trial. Turns out the family was okay. In the Jeep was a man, woman, and their very young child. The drunk claimed he wasn't drunk at all. Then he was told that a mother and her 14-year-old son, I was 14 at the time, 15 now, were willing to testify against that. He pled guilty. Turns out he was a young college student who went from someone who just wanted to party to spending Christmas in jail. As long as it was only one Christmas in jail, dude got off easy. He could have very easily just committed triple homicide, but he got lucky, and I hope he takes it as a lesson at the very least. Story 93. I had a job pumping gas at a Shell station, can't pump your own gas in Oregon, in high school. It was midday and a late 80s topless Jeep Wrangler came careening in. I recognized the passenger as the younger brother of a kid I went to high school with. It was a beautiful Saturday and they looked like they were having fun. I didn't recognize the driver, but he definitely looked off his rocker a little bit. I said, "What's up?" to my friend's little brother and pumped their gas. The dude paid me and peeled out of the station, cutting across a 4-lane road, cutting a bunch of cars off. They were both hooting and hollering. I didn't think anything of it. About 10 minutes later, I watched dozens of emergency, fire, and police race down the road. Once again, didn't think anything of it. I found out later that 5 miles down the road, the guy in the Jeep was the kid's uncle and he had lost control on a 25 miles per hour turn. Reportedly, he was going 85. They went off a steep embankment and weren't wearing seatbelts. They both died on impact, and I was the last one to have human contact with them. Story 94. This past December, a week before Christmas and 2 days after her birthday, my mom was hit head-on by a young man driving with no insurance, fake inspection ticket, fake registration, and a revoked license, while currently awaiting trial for his 5th driving on a revoked or suspended license charge. He decided that where he was going was more important than everyone else on the road, went to pass the car in front of him over the solid double yellow lines and hit her head-on. She was headed home after work, minding her own business, driving down the backcountry roads to get home after doing some last-minute Christmas shopping. The last thing she remembers is waking up in a ditch being cut out of her vehicle. She had a severe brain bleed, neck broken in 2 places, broken ribs, broken pelvis, broken back, and both of her arms were completely shattered. By God's grace, her legs were fine, but we nearly lost her. She required several emergency surgeries to save her arms. She was in the hospital for 12 days, and when she was released, she had to be transported to a nursing facility where she remained for a month. Intensive physical therapy helped her learn how to walk again, and she is still undergoing physical therapy and has a repeat surgery this morning for one of her wrists. Multiple plates, screws, rods, etc. in her arms. After the cast on her left arm came off, it was clear she would never be able to fully straighten it again. She has been forever maimed. This has completely changed her life. She works in IT and spends most of her day typing. She has had to learn how to type all over again with her new limitations. She's in constant pain and is now going through some pretty major depression because of the entire situation. She has taken to the bottle, and there's been hints of wanting to take her own life. This has completely wrecked our family. We're doing the best we can to be there for her and get her all the help she needs, but of course, she's stubborn and knows better than everyone else. The kid who hit her also ruined his life. I wrote a letter to the DA, and they escalated his charges to a direct indictment by the grand jury. He's looking at several years in prison. Before my letter, it was facing some petty charges for driving on the wrong side of the road. The DA had no idea what actually happened until he finally looked at my letter and all the reports the police took/witness statements. Does this make me a jerk? I don't know. I don't care. I told the DA I would consider it not just a personal favor, but a favor to all of humanity if he nailed this guy's butt to the wall with extreme prejudice. It's clear that nothing prior to this was keeping him off the road. Oh, and he also broke his legs and ankles from the waist down. I think he's still in a wheelchair. Oh well, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. I forgive the young man, but our family deserves justice for his choices. Story 95. It was the summer of 2016. It was late at night and my stepdad bursts out of his and my mother's room and grabs his keys and just leaves. My mom comes home from getting some food for breakfast the next day, tells us to put it away and puts my stepdad's mother to the room she was sleeping in. Me and my sisters are confused at this moment and talk about it as she calls my stepdad to get her before he leaves. We're left alone for almost 5 hours. And by then, my mom comes home and has got us to bed as it was almost 2 a.m. She goes to bed as well, and by the time I wake up, it's the next day. I hear the garage door open and my mom and stepdad walk in from the door. I see my stepsister's favorite green pillow in his arms as they go to their room and lock the door. In the next 30 minutes, I text my mom and knock on the door for her to tell me what the hell happened. She opens the door and brings me to the shared bedroom of me and my sisters. Also at this point, there was a bunch of family on my stepdad's side in the living room and my siblings in there watching TV. My mom closes the door and locks it. She has me sit on the top bunk of the bunk bed and she grabs my hand. Very unnatural for her to do, and her eyes were red and puffy and her hair a mess. There was a car crash last night. She shudders in a breath, and your sister and brother were in the car. At this point, my mind was already going to the worst thing possible. They both died. And then she says, they died. Your brother died in the car and your sister died in the hospital. What about the baby? She didn't make it either. Story 96. More like a day and a half, but yes. My ex-girlfriend was an extremely mentally unstable drug and alcohol abuser who needed help, or she would eventually end up hurting someone outside of herself. Right before we broke up, she told me she was escorting for someone. I already had an issue with that, which contributed to why we broke it off, but the real trouble came when I found out she was making less than $300 a visit, and this woman who hired her was doing crazy crap to her, like putting cigarettes out on her back, beating her and leaving black and blue marks, letting other people have turns with her while she was tied down and unable to escape, and even spiking her drinks so she could bang with her unconscious body. My ex would take the money she made and spend it on copious amounts of drugs and booze, then use what little she had left on a pallet of instant noodles that she ate throughout the week. Normally, I would have let sleeping dogs lie, but she had a job as a kindergarten helper, which meant she was working with kids during the day and doing all her drugs and escorting during nights, weekends, and breaks. I had a lot of trouble reconciling with someone doing these things and working with kids, so I called into her work and left an anonymous tip, and then called her mom and explained what was happening. Within 24 hours, her work drug tested her and it came back positive for multiple substances, so they fired her on the spot and blacklisted her in the state. Her mom froze all her accounts so she couldn't go anywhere, flew up to where we were, told the apartment complex my ex was living in to cancel the lease, and then paid off all the fees for early termination, which she was in the legal right to do because she was the legal signer of the lease. Her mom then gave her the choice of figuring out where to live and how to make money on her own, or going to a 6-month rehab and halfway house program, and she apparently chose to go to rehab. The last I heard, she was living with her mother and sober, and graduated from community college. I still sometimes wonder if meddling was a good idea, but I don't regret what I did. She's in a better situation, and I think that's all I can really ask for. I feel like OP and I might get some flack for this, but I think intervening was the right choice. Let me explain why. Because of where she worked, she was presenting a risk to the children. And I think that's where, the break point is for that sort of thing, you know? If someone's a danger to themselves, you can try your best to help, but really, you shouldn't be calling their work or anything, I think. But once a threat is presented to someone else because of their actions, those people deserve to be protected. And OP, I think you did what you did because of that. In which case, I think it's fine. Story 97. This happened an hour ago, and I'm still shaking in fear about how my life will change. There's 2 situations that lead to the conclusion of the screw-up. First situation. Asked sister-in-law to borrow her 360 pocket camera for a trip wife and I are soon vacationing to. Found out the memory card still had content on it. Her husband travels a lot for work, and she made a 1-hour POV-style 360 adult content video, assuming she sent it to him a while back. I've had the hots for her for the past 8 years. Before she got married, and I have, there were several tensions between us. Living together for a year as strictly roommates, movies, dinners, getting drunk while watching movies, just the two of us, breakfasts, etc. A certain trust was implemented and nothing ever happened between us, as at the time I was dating my now wife, which was working at a distance. But damn, if she at the time had just touched my hand once, I think I would have lived a whole different life. So finding this video, I thought I struck gold. I could have what I've always fantasized about, gifting my past self while living with my happy current life. Second accident. I have an automated house that lights up the house with a geolocation. Before the app worked with Apple HomeKit, a third-party app needed to be downloaded which tracks your family and friends. Free version only allows you to add one person, so my wife. Wife and I have had this app for 3 years now, even if it's useless now after an app update a couple years ago on the original app. We never deleted it since it was useful for tracking each other using notifications. I get a notification when she's at work and when I arrive home. We also both get notifications when one arrives home. Good for times where she does groceries, for example, and I get a notification to prompt me to go out and help her out. Or when I work late and finally leave the office, prompting her to set up the dining table. Last night she fell asleep without charging her phone. I hate when she does that. Today she goes to work with barely any battery. Like what if she needs to call the police or a hospital for an emergency? I have the day off today, and it was the day I was going to do the deed. I don't only go with simple 360 video, but literally set it up on my VR headset in bed with AirPods on. The whole experience. This would have lasted me tops 5 minutes, but the foreplay she does is long and boring. Then the action starts and I go on. Wife's phone didn't give me a notification as she arrived because of her now dead phone. She comes to the bedroom to see me pleasuring myself in bed with goggles on. She knows I do it occasionally, but has never seen me. I sneak it in here and there. But VR adult content was never discussed, as in, is it cheating if type thing? You know what I'm talking about. Is it cheating if you have an intimate doll? Is it cheating if it's a robot? Is it cheating if you put a toy on someone and someone from across the internet does it in real time? Anyway, it was the type of convo we'd have at the start of our relationship when we were still friends 10 years ago, just to see how far one could take it. Weird, I know, but let's say it was one of those pre-game convos to see if we're on the same page before things started getting serious. Those convos were not only about banging, by the way. Anyway, VR wasn't a thing back then, so was never discussed. I never knew if it was right or wrong for me to do so. Well, I guess it was wrong. She rushed in and ripped the goggles from my face. That's when I see her in the room. What the hell, she says, and then she looks inside. Is that my sister? I'm screwed. She still had her shoes on from arriving, so she just grabbed her bag with the VR headset and left the house. Seeing from the tracking app, she's at her parents' house, which are the neighbors of the sister-in-law. I'm screwed. I don't... Just come on, man. Why'd you do this? What's wrong with you? I don't know if this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I hope not. OP's a moron, right? Like, what? I feel like just out of principle, you should not be doing that. You happenstantially get that sort of thing, whatever. Just give it back and be like, ooh, sorry about that, but this was still on here, and just say you didn't look at it. Simple as that, brother. Not, oh, I'm going to save this for later, you freak. Maybe I'm being too harsh, but I don't think so. Anyway, that's the last story for today. At least it wasn't a horribly traumatic one to end on, huh? Just a somewhat upsetting one. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.